So when I was looking into the topic for today's episode, one specific torture device that caught my attention is something from medieval Europe called the armchair of inquiries. First of all, iconic name. I could not get over that. Much better than what my therapist calls the couch of confessions. Now, this was a wooden chair, but not just any wooden chair, nay. The armchair of inquiries was special. The seat, backrest, and armrest were all covered in rows of sharp spikes. And we'll talk more later about how and why it was used, but man, who came up with that idea? I take some serious thought. It's just giving me real DIY vibes. Almost like someone went to Michael's for inspiration, was doing an arts and crafts project, loved the purple felt, glitter, and 27 steak knives to make this chair. Murder, with assistance by Michael's. Not sponsored. Anyway, this device sent me down a deep, shocking rabbit hole. Looking into all sorts of fascinating methods of torture. And I'll tell you right now, this episode does not disappoint. After we're done here, you're gonna be very happy to have not lived in medieval Europe, because it seems like anyone could be accused of anything and end up in something like the armchair of inquiries. Now, if you're like me, you've already been to one of those torture museums before. I mean, of course, hello, standard. And they always have those insane steampunk-looking contraptions. And they'll have names like the Pair of Anguish, Lucifer's Nail File, the Iron Maiden. Like, even if you haven't been to a torture museum, you might have heard of some of them because they're just that iconic. Like the Iron Maiden was a steel upright coffin completely lined with metal spikes. Not something you want to be slowly closed inside of. Well, guess what? The Iron Maiden and a whole bunch of other supposedly medieval torture devices aren't real. They weren't around at all in the Middle Ages. It wasn't until the late 1800s, when circuses and carnivals started to become popular, that con artists and showmen started to charge people to come see these fake torture instruments, for shock value. It's the OG clickbait. And we're still doing it today because it's just as effective. People love to imagine their worst fears played out, I guess. In 2005, someone created a fake Wikipedia article for a torture device called the Spanish Tickler, which kind of looked like a Wolverine claw. But I guess it turns out it was fake. Like, there's a lot of fake torture devices, and even in the torture museums, a lot of the ones they have up for the visual or whatever, they're fake. They're not actually real. And I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to share that with you. You're welcome. The craziest thing about all like the fake torture porn is that the real methods of torture that were used back in the day were actually like a lot more crazier. They even got very creative. I'm talking like Game of Thrones level. That's what I've been told. I never saw Game of Thrones, but I hear it is pretty brutal. And people have been finding creative ways to hurt each other since the dawn of time, really. I mean, back then, without social media, they had to figure out other ways to entertain themselves. And one of the best outlets, it seems, was torture. Party. So before we talk about the devices itself, torture has had some universal rules. And one of the most popular rules was that you could not, and they did not, torture their own people, which was interesting that there were ground rules when it comes to torture. But I mean, that's cool. Everything else pretty much was A-okay, but you couldn't torture your own people. It had to be randoms. So throughout history, most of it has been inflicted on people like prisoners of war and enslaved people. And one of the earliest examples of this that we have actually comes from Valerian, I guess that's this guy's full name, was a Roman emperor back in the 3rd century. I guess he was eventually overthrown by the king of Persia. So Valerian was taken prisoner, and because he was a foreigner and a non-Persian citizen, his captors, well, that gave them the green light to do whatever the hell they wanted with him. So the Persian king, I guess this is the rumor, this is what was said, okay, but he used Valerian as like a human footstool. So literally, he would like walk all over him when he needed to mount his horse. Like he would step on his back. Or let's say he's sitting and lounging and he wants to put his feet up. Guess what? Val, get over here. Get on all fours. Let me put my feet up. Val tried to offer the king a lump sum in order to be released. But unfortunately, the king wasn't tempted. He liked the footstool. So this pissed Val off. And the king was honestly offended. The fact that this Valerian guy would dare to address him as an equal and like offer him money so he could be set free was insulting. And the king was like, you know what, my little footstool, guess what? I'm gonna teach you a little lesson. So the story goes, like this is some real shit. The story goes that he had Valerian tied up, told him to open his mouth. Oh yeah, yep, and forced him to swallow molten gold. First of all, what the fuck is molten gold? Well, imagine lava going down your throat, melting everything it touches, and then solidifying around your organs. That's what was happening to Val. But the king was not satisfied, and he wanted to do more to his little footstool turned lava man. So the king had him, Val, skinned alive, okay? And then he takes the skin, stuffs it with like straw and stuff and like sews it together. And guess what? He kept Valerian's skin / now scarecrow in the main Persian temple. It was like a trophy or decor, but also making a statement. Like, if you talk back to me, you're gonna end up just like that guy over there, Mr. Scarecrow boy. Oh yeah, bitch. Like, this guy was morbid. Treating a foreign leader like this was obviously incredibly insulting to Valerian's people in Rome, who would later defeat Persia and reclaim Valerian's skin in order to give him a proper burial. Look, Joan, if you speak back to me, guess what? Molten gold. I'm getting inspired. Not that it's right, but sometimes necessary to let people know that you're the bitch in charge. So at least Valerian's skin got a proper burial. That's really nice. But what the Persian king did to Val is one of the most popular motives behind torture. Sending a message. Dun, dun, dun. That's what it really comes down to, okay? Because look, this comes up years later with the Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church was essentially the highest power in Europe at this time. Like, they were running the show. This is back in the Middle Ages. Like, the church was their government. The government was the church. And that's just how it was. But as technology advances and people travel, learn new things, get new ideas, find themselves, some of them are naturally going to gravitate towards different beliefs, like Judaism or Islam. Now, Catholicism was still the law of the land, but the rise of these other religions scared the absolute crap out of the Roman Catholic Church. And most of all, Daddy Pope. He was worried. These people are going to hell and we got to get rid of it, you know? So in 1252, the Pope decides to greenlight the use of torture for heretics. Now, a heretic, that's, to put it easily, that's like anyone who went against the Pope or the beliefs of the church itself. If that sounds really vague, it's because, yeah, like most of it was vague. Most people associate heresy with being caught practicing witchcraft or like doing something demonic with your butt. But it could also apply to really anything. So as you can imagine, things get a little loosey-goosey, and pretty soon anyone can be accused of being a heretic and punished as one. The Pope essentially said, you're either with us or we don't know you. You're against us, you're an enemy, and that must be handled. And yeah, that scared a lot of people. So by the 1400s, the Pope and the Vatican are getting very worried by all these conversations and like all this free thought. We don't like that. They're thinking, we don't like that. So together with the King and Queen of Spain, the church creates a group called dun, 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 the Spanish Inquisition. First of all, if you haven't seen their outfits, give them a little Google. Please hold, I'm Googling their little outfits right now because I forgot to look it up before I filmed this. Thank you. wow, fancy. I love red. I love red. They're in all red if you're not Googling. They're in all red from head to toe. Great for those of us who start our period. You don't have to worry about anything, you know what I'm saying? Red from head to toe. Since a bunch of the high-ranking Inquisition officials were cardinals, the Inquisition became synonymous with these floor-length red robes. It's very dramatic. I love red. The main goal of the Inquisition was to, quote-unquote, identify heretics, or in other words, anyone who was straying off the good path of Roman Catholicism. Okay, so here's what they did. They had eyes everywhere, okay? Snitches running around town. And usually it was men who were like spies in town, kinda, you know? And they'd go to the guys in charge and be like, hey, I saw my neighbor so-and-so talking to the devil. And then the Inquisition would be like, oh shit, you know? So that's how they kept their eyes on everybody. By snitches, rats, loser. Okay. Now the Inquisition was actually pretty modern in the sense that they had some ground rules when it came to torture, or as they like to call it, torment. The Spanish Inquisition rulebook said that torment could only happen for 15 minutes max. So humane of them. Way to go, you guys. I mean, 15 minutes doesn't sound that long, but like, have you ever tried to hold a plank for a minute? I did that one time, it was too much. So 15 minutes, I'm busy, I can't do that. So as you can imagine, it was 15 minutes, you get it. The Inquisition had 3 forms of torture that were the most common. The first one is called the strappado, which to me sounds like a strap-on. I'm like, you want me to bend over, Mr. Pope? But no, that's not what it was. Your hands would be tied behind your back and then a rope would hoist you up from the wrist. After a minute, you might be okay. But after 10, your shoulders were definitely dislocated. Number 2 was called the toca, which sounds like a perfume I got from anthropology, but it actually means waterboarding. Specifically, the Inquisition would funnel water into the prisoner's throat until they were nearly unconscious and felt like they were drowning, but they weren't. It was just fun and games. The third most popular torture method used during this time was the porto, or the rack. This was a big wooden table or frame with shackles on either end for your wrist and your ankles. Those shackles would then be pulled, essentially stretching your body out like an X shape, you know? Like, you know, it's kind of kinky, but like that, like your wrists and then your feet, and then it would just stretch. Bitch. Yep, you're stretching. Sounds fun, right? Sounds hot and kinky. No, it's not. This would actually cause your joints to dislocate and then your bones would break. Rough. Now, another rule of the Spanish Inquisition, they were not allowed to kill you, but they could cut it pretty close. And here's the thing, you could get hit multiple rounds of 15-minute torment sessions, depending on the crime you were accused of. Maybe you were caught with counterfeit money. 2 rounds of torment, or maybe something more serious like sodomy. Now that could get you 8 rounds of torment. Do the math, 15 minutes times 8. I don't know, let me know in the comment section, because that's a long time, sounds like. Okay, now because of these practices, the Spanish Inquisition is credited with really putting torture on the map. They were the trendsetters, maybe not in a good way, but a way. So in the year 1542, Rome was feeling very inspired. They're like, oh my God, Spain is having so much fun over there. We should do that too. So the church kicked off the Roman Inquisition and they were like, we love the torture, but we need to have our own like version. And Rome, they popped off. They were like, torture, fun, let's up it a notch. They didn't have strict rules. So for example, they were allowed people to be tortured for up to 30 minutes at a time. And at this time, actually, like it wasn't just limited to the Inquisitions. In fact, civil courts all around Europe were using the Inquisition's methods, but with no time restrictions and like no rules. In other words, everybody, you get to torture, everybody gets to torture. And it's just really cool to look at from afar. You know? I mean, they started using all kinds of props, horses, wheels, rats, you name it. They were getting creative with it and figuring out a way to use it for torture. Fun. Now, The Romans didn't invent the wheel, but they did use it to kill one guy. And while no one deserves to be killed this violently, he kind of had it coming for him. This is definitely a little pin note for myself also, that I want to do a murder mystery and makeup on this guy, because there's this guy, Peter Neers. He was a German serial killer, and it's said that he had killed over 500 people, including 24 fetuses, which he cut out of pregnant women. So if you're gonna torture anybody, it's gonna be this guy, right? So at least, so allegedly, Peter would use their remains in satanic rituals, and also he participated in some cannibalism. Oh shit. Now, when this guy was caught, this led the church and the whole Inquisition to believe that this man, Peter, he was a powerful, dark magician. And you bet they wanted to hunt this man down and torture his ass. Peter was a very sneaky man, and it would take years before he was recognized in a Roman bathhouse and was captured and caught and brought in for the Romans to have some fun with. So the year's 1581. Romans had gotten a hold of this Peter guy, and they did not hold back. I'm all smiling because again, if you're gonna torture anyone, this guy, sure, we can all get behind this guy. So here's what they did. They ended up torturing him for over the course of 3 days. On the first day, the Romans tore strips of Peter's flesh from his body and then poured hot oil right on into those open wounds. Ouch. Talk about 0 to 60 real quick. On the second day of torture, the Romans did to Pete hot oil on his feet. So after they peel his skin and do the whole hot oil thing, they then dragged his oiled feet over hot coals. Now, essentially, this was roasting him alive, which had me thinking I bet that's where the expression roast comes from. When Comedy Central does it. Maybe. Now, it might seem like I'm making light of the situation, but I want to remind everyone at home that when Peter was arrested, the authorities discovered body parts of multiple fetuses in his suitcase. I'm honestly surprised a human can survive all of this and live to see another day, but Peter did. On the third day of imprisonment, So on the third day of his imprisonment, the Romans dragged Peter outside where they broke him on a wheel. Now, this thing, it's called the wheel. This was another torturous device. And this was an excruciating, torturous means of killing someone. Breaking someone on the wheel was the phrase for when a big-ass wagon wheel was slammed down onto somebody repeatedly. In Peter's case, it happened to him 42 times. And what this did was break their bones in multiple locations. It was such a brutal form of torture that it was reserved for convicted rapists, traitors, and murderers, like Peter. The whole point was to torture the convict as harshly as possible without killing them immediately, which would be considered too merciful. After Peter's legs and arms were broken, his legs and arms were then threaded through the spokes of the wagon wheel and secured then with a rope. Just for a little extra flair, the whole wheel, body and all, was hung from a pole, kind of like a crucifixion. And after all this was said and done, the prisoner would be left dangling on the wheel to slowly die a painful death, which at times could often take days. Talk about slow and painful. Jeez Louise. But for Peter, they really showed up. They went above and beyond for this man, and they decided to dismember his body before cutting it into tiny pieces. Now, I will say, it is a little refreshing to hear a story about someone getting tortured who honestly, I'm sorry, Lord, kinda deserved it. Because back then, thanks to the Inquisition and the church, tons of people were getting horribly mistreated for no damn good reason. Especially women, as always, like we learned in our witches episode. Yeah, so that's a problem. I had a funny feeling deep down that there were probably some creative medieval torture devices for women specifically. And once again, I was right. What can I say? I just, know a lot. I don't know. It's just something told me that probably happened. There was something called a breast ripper. which maybe you're like, what is that? And you're guessing it right now. Well, guess what? It was ripping titties off with hot irons. It looks like a claw almost. And then it goes around the boob and just like salad tongs. Okay, but claws, and it just goes around the boob and clamps just the whole titty. And once they had like a firm grasp, it would be ripped away from the body. This is probably where the word snatched comes from. I don't know, because it's not in the name, but that to me is that's a snatch. You want to talk about snatched? Okay. And this tool would be used on women who were accused of cheating on their husbands, or maybe performing an abortion on themselves. There was also something called the cucking stool, which was reserved for disorderly women. Dear, here we go. I mean, define disorderly woman. Exactly. No one knows. Whatever that means. It was like up to whoever was in charge that day. It was basically a teeter-totter, and on one side, it had a chair, like a wooden, normal-ass looking chair. And then on the other side, a pulley system that could like lift it up into the air, right? Now the chair, it kind of reminds me of like a squatty potty situation in a way, because the chair's bottom, where your butt went, would be completely cut out. So your ass went through the chair. Then they would tie the woman to the chair and like hoist her into the air, so everyone in town could take turns shouting and throwing stuff at the women who were just hanging up there terrified with their ass out. Yeah, I know. I don't know. Like their asses, I don't know. But honestly, I would take that one over the other ones, right? I'll sit in that chair and just yell and throw stuff at me. I'll shit on you. Watch me. Yeah. Anyway, so these devices against women were not even the most interesting ones I found. I also found a device that was used on witches. Yeah. Or just women in general. It's been called one of the most misogynistic torture devices for women ever made. Congratulations. Most of the time, it was actually husbands that would request their wives to be subjected to this type of torture. Oh, yeah. Your dirty-ass husband could be like, I'm tired of her ass. Which, it was used on the unruly lower-class women in order to be put in line and taught a lesson. I'm talking about a device called the Scold's Bridle. Now, let me tell you about this shit. One of the earliest uses of the Scold's Bridle was in 1567 on a Scottish woman named Bessie. Oh, Bessie. Now, Bessie did one of the worst things you could possibly do during this time. I know. Wait for it. She called out a man for lying. How dare she? Bessie? Get it together, Bessie. How dare you, Bessie? It was a big deal. I am so, every day I wake up, I say, praise God, I was not born back then, because what the fuck? Like, it must have sucked. Oh my God, right? Am I right? High five. Great. So I guess Bessie was buying something from a man in town. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing, but I am. Because Bessie was buying something from a man in town. And she accused him of ripping her off in front of the townspeople. So the man demanded Bessie be put in the Scold's Bridle. How dare she disrespect him? Fuck her, though, It was called a Scold's Bridle because in medieval time, a scold was essentially a woman from the lower class who, didn't hold back when it came to speaking out and giving her opinions. And a bridle is that thing that goes, in a horse's mouth. So the person who's riding the horse can stop him from galloping away by pulling the Horse Lessons 101 with me, Bailey Sarian. So the bridle goes in the mouth and there's reins and stuff, right? Or whatever. And you're sitting on the horse. And then if the horse is galloping, you want him to slow down or just stop in general, you pull back. And this bar, here's my hairbrush, goes like this. Bridle. And that's basically what it did for women too. Let me describe this thing to you guys. There were definitely a few different forms of it throughout the years, but the one Bessie had to endure was a mask made of a really heavy metal iron. Now it had a metal strap on the top and the sides so it would fit tightly onto a woman's head and be really hard to take off. You couldn't take it off, to be honest. On top of the mask, there were these spiky metal twisted animal horns, There were cutouts around the eyes, nose, and also mouth. And if you take a look at the picture, it looks like a scary, haunting metal, like demon mask from a Saw movie. Like, let's be honest, Saw. That would fuck me up when I was a kid. Once the mask was placed on top of a woman's head, she would have to open her mouth to insert a metal gag. This gag was a flat piece of metal with a large spike on it, pointing down towards the tongue. That way if she talked, you see what would happen if she tried to talk? She'd be stabbing her tongue, her mouth. It was just scary and uncomfortable, but most of all humiliating, because you would have to walk around with this shit on, especially if your bozo husband was the one who requested you be put in the bridle. Husbands would tie a leash to their wives who were wearing the Scold's bridle and force her to parade around town. Oh, God. In Bessie's case, she was paraded around town, like on this walk of shame, while blood was dripping out of her mouth. And then worst of all, the townspeople were actually encouraged to harass the women. So they're like, please feel free to spit, assault, I don't know, just do shit to them, make them feel bad. And they did just that while the husband is dragging poor Bessie around. So that's fun, huh? Thoughts, reflections? No, you cannot parade me around town with that on, Joan, you sick bitch. I will not put that on for you. The next story was, well, it's real disturbing. There's a quote that says, anything a fiction author can come up with, history has already done it worse at least once. And ain't that the truth? So guess what? We're now in Hungary, 1514. During something called the Peasant War. The Peasant War was an uprising against their government. The government at the time kept taking away the peasants' food, clothes, and freedoms in general. So over 100,000 Hungarian peasants united together to overthrow the king under the leadership of a man named Georgi Daca. Sadly, the peasants lost this war, and they had even more of their freedom taken away. Georgi, which is such a cute name, huh, was captured by the government and sentenced to death by torture. And they were going to use Georgi's death to send a message to the local peasants. With a crowd of royals and captured peasant prisoners watching, oh, and also a live band playing happy music in the background, Georgi's torture began. First, guards stripped Georgi naked and tied up his feet. Then they teased him, calling him the peasant king. They brought in a few of his peasant soldiers and forced them to sit Georgi on an iron throne. But this wasn't any old iron throne, oh nay, nay. This was an iron chair that had a fire set underneath it, slowly heating up the chair like an oven. So, the longer Georgi sat on it, the more his skin and flesh melted onto the actual seat itself. Yeah, his balls melted right on that chair. Because that's not enough, of course not. They then brought in a burning hot metal scepter. You know, like those fancy wand sticks that royals need for some reason? They always got one. So then they shoved this burning hot metal scepter into his open palm. Then, to complete the royal look, they brought in a blazing hot crown and placed it on his head. They went off. The dedication to this piece was like, wow, because like they gave him a throne, his own crown, and a scepter, but all of it's melting his skin and killing him. Like, wow. You guys are kind of crazy back then. So Georgi, poor Georgi, had to sit on this slowly heating throne for over an hour while the crowd gathered and happily watched. Here's your crown, peasant king. Here's your throne. You don't like it? Aw, poor little baby. You want to be a king? Go ahead. Taunting him. Then, because again, not enough, the guards decided to take things up a notch. They brought out Georgi's brother, one of the imprisoned peasant soldiers, and they decided that they were going to murder him right in front of Georgi. As if seeing your own brother getting murdered right in front of you wasn't enough, they then cut up his body into little pieces. Then several guards heated up pliers in a nearby fire, and they started pulling flesh from all over Georgie's body. Guards then told 9 of the peasant soldiers to finish killing Georgie themselves. How? Well, through cannibalism, of course. Eat 'em! That's right. They told them to go over to Georgie, bite and swallow chunks of flesh where the hot iron had just burned his body. Or, if they didn't want to do this, let's say, well then they would be killed right on the spot. 4 of the 9 peasants refused to follow through with this and were killed on the spot the same way Georgie's brother was, murdered and then cut up into a bunch of pieces. The other 5 peasants started chowing down for their life. After taking several bites and swallowing, they were taken out of their chains and freed from prison. At what cost? Georgie died on the throne that day. His corpse was then ripped into pieces. They displayed different pieces of his body all over as a warning to the peasants. Don't even think about doing this or challenging us or speaking up or doing anything ever again. And interesting fact, that throne that Georgie died on, that could be the origin of what we know as the armchair of inquiries. For our final torture device, we're going to cover one of the OGs of pain and suffering. No, I'm not talking about family dinners. I'm talking about the Porto, aka the rack. And get your head out of the gutter, it has nothing to do with titties. Now, the rack was like the shit. Okay, now the rack was a movie star. It was timeless, simple, yet elegant, and should have won all the awards for how effective it was. And not only that, the rack was international, honey. Anyone who was anyone in the torture game relied on the trusty rack. I'm talking the Greeks, the Romans, the Russians, the French, the Brits. So, you're probably wondering, Billy, shut up. What did it look like? Tell me. Tell me right now. Okay, so listen. So there were 2 major designs of the rack. One version looked like a long wooden table, kind of like something you'd see in like an Adam family dining room, right? Then another popular version looked like a long, wide wooden ladder that was placed on an incline. But it didn't matter which version you preferred for the rack, because at the end of the day, they both had something in common. On each end of the ladder or the table or whatever the fuck, there were 2 rotating logs or wheels. Rotation is happening. So, let's say a convicted criminal comes on down. Come on down. You're up next. They'd be taken into a room where the rack was located. Now, this would be typically in like a dungeon or a dark place. Next, the person would be forced onto the rack. The person's ankles would be tied to one of the rotating logs with either like a rope or a chain or something like that. And then the wrist would be tied to the other log. You're kind of put in that stretch position. Kind of hot. But then it takes a dark twist, bitch. This put the person in a like horizontal position. Think Superman flying through the air. Great. I see you're imagining it. The interrogators would then come in and get to work. They'd grill the prisoner with all sorts of questions about what they were being accused of. If their answer was unacceptable or they didn't like the answer that this guy was giving them, which often happened, they'd start to crank the wheels on either end of the rack. Just very slowly. To make the prisoner really feel it, live in it a little bit. Little by little, the prisoner would be stretched out, way beyond how like a human body should stretch. As you can imagine, this would cause excruciating pain, and the prisoner would be screaming, hollering, shouting, all of the good stuff, which is why normally this would take place in like a dungeon or somewhere dark because it was just so loud. They're so dramatic when they're getting stretched. But the most spine-chilling or spine-ripping part of this whole thing is that as a human being is being stretched out like that, there are blood-curdling sounds made by joints and bones ripping. Yeah, it makes noise. And popping. I don't know what that sounds like, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. I think I'm good. And the scene was so gruesome that just forcing prisoners to watch this happen to other people was enough to actually scare the crap out of them and usually get a confession. But confessions weren't the only reason they used this platform of pain. They used it to pry information from people. They used it to send a message, like earlier with the Valerian guy. They also used it to set a grim example and keep people in their place. And it's been used like that ever since it was invented. The origin story of the rack goes back thousands of years. Researchers aren't positive which civilization was the first to use it to turn people into Stretch Armstrong, but some texts say it first pops up in the Greek Empire around 300 BC. Apparently, famous Greek King Alexander the Great used the rack to torture some of his underlings who were planning to assassinate him. Well, in the year 1477, there was another version of the rack that came out, and the British called it the Duke of Exeter's Daughter because it was created by the Duke of, maybe you guessed it, Exeter. And guess he considered this device his daughter? I'm not sure. But while this rack was probably used quite consistently, it wasn't until about 150 years later when the Duke's grisly daughter made it into the spotlight. In 1605, there was a group of 13 English rebels who were really pissed off at the King of England. His name was like King James I. They were super pissed. The reason they were so pissed was because they felt the king was forcing his religion on the entire kingdom. And not only this, the rebels, who were Catholics, were tired of being persecuted and targeted for their beliefs. They said it was time for Catholicism to retake the English throne. So they came up with a plan, or maybe a plot. On November 5th, King James was scheduled to give a speech at the House of Parliament in London. Now, Parliament is essentially the English version of Congress, and this speech was a big deal. It was an event announcing the start of a new session of lawmaking. Since the rebels knew the king was going to be there, on that day specifically, they decided that it was the perfect place to assassinate him. Kill him, dead, forever, gone, bye. So they came up with an idea. Why don't we blow up the House of Parliament? Yeah, they're high-fiving. Yeah, that's such a good idea. But what the rebels didn't know is that some bitch-ass tattletale sent an anonymous note to the king's men just before the event. This note told them about the plot, when, where, and how it was going to happen. Just all the details, honestly, that they needed to know in a convenient little package. Anyway, in the middle of the night on the morning of the big event, royal authorities searched the crypt underneath the House of Parliament. There, they found a man in a black coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and a very chic mustache, and wearing boots with the spurs. Boots with the spurs. The whole club was looking at her, or him. That song actually goes with the story because low, 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 they were underneath in the crypt. Anyway, so this mystery Zorro-looking guy, his name was Guy Fawkes. Yeah, great name. I love a name like this because this is a name I could get behind. Guy, you can't mess that one up. So Guy was one of the Catholic rebels I mentioned earlier, so the king's goons confronted him and they placed him under arrest. I mean, obviously, he's gonna blow up the place. Not only this, they see that he was guarding not one, not two, but 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to rip apart the House of Parliament. He went above and beyond. For sure. This became known as the gunpowder plot. Now, it didn't work. I know, it could have been cool. I mean, not really. And now, poor Guy was caught and he was about to pay for it. And it's not fair because it was a lot of people's ideas. He was just like, oh, you know what? Was he willing to die if he was? It doesn't matter. I'm getting off track. Okay, look, so he gets caught. Guess what? Your turn, Guy. So that night, Guy is taken to the Tower of London. I went there one time. It's real cool because today, the Tower of London is the home of the crown jewels and of the British monarchy, and millions of people visit it every year. It's so cool and historic. I hear it's a tourist trap that I totally fell for. But from the year 1100 to about 1952, It was actually a brutal, unforgiving place, or prison. Sorry about that, prison. I didn't know that. I was like, oh my God, jewels, ooh, buildings, culture. On November 6th, 1605, King James is, understandably, pissed off. So he sent an order over to the Tower authorizing the use of torture on Guy, so he would give up the name of his co-conspirators. The order said, quote, if he will not confess, the gentler tortures are to be the first used on him. Godspeed your good work. Motivational words, I guess. So first, Guy was placed in a cell that was so small that no adult could stand comfortably, sit, or even lay down. There was no physical way for him to rest, which in itself sounds awful. Step 2, Guy was taken into a torture chamber underneath the tower. There, he endured something called the manacles. These were iron handcuffs placed tightly on Guy's wrists, which were then attached to a rope. Guy was then lifted off the floor for hours on end, destroying his hands, wrists, and even shoulders. While hanging, he was interrogated, and at times, by the king himself. But Guy was no rat. He did not give anyone's name up. So, they move on to step 3. It's time for Guy to go on a little date with the Duke's daughter, aka put him on the rack. Guy was dragged into a chamber underneath one of the towers of his prison. There he was laid on the rack with ropes tied to his ankles and wrists. Slowly but surely, the interrogators asked Guy to give up some names. He kept refusing, so he kept getting stretched. Turning the dial. I don't know what a dial sounds like, but just imagine. And all that popping and ripping I mentioned earlier, yeah, that was happening to Guy. And not just for a few hours. Guy would end up spending almost 3 entire days on the rack, going through just horrifying, excruciating, terrible pain. Eventually, he started to give names. And King James couldn't have been any happier, because now he's like, I know who to kill. Yippee skippy. But even though Guy gave the king everything that he wanted, Guy's torture was not over. I mean, not even close. After sitting in his jail cell for a couple more months, Guy was dragged out of the Tower of London on January 31st, 1606. He was then tied to a horse and dragged through the streets of London. God damn you guys, like calm down. Jeez. Dramatic much? Oh my God. When they arrived at the middle of the city, Guy was forced, because he's still alive after all this, Guy was forced to watch his co-conspirators get literally ripped apart. First, they were hanged. He's like, yeah, you're going to watch this shit. Look what you did, Guy. We're going to watch together. Let me get some popcorn. So first, he's watching. First, they were hanged, but while they were still alive, for some odd reason, they chopped off their dicks. Unknown. For fun, I guess. They burned the dick in front of them, like, ha ha ha. Again. I don't know. And then they would have a little weenie roast. And then they would be sliced open and like their guts and hearts would be removed. And that's when they would die. After that, their bodies were quartered, meaning that they were chopped into 4 pieces. So I don't know how, but they were. And then their heads were cut off. Again, a little overkill, but they love the dramatics over there. I don't know what it is. It's like, you need to just take a chill pill. Well, then again, they were really bored back then. They didn't have anything to do. So next, it was Guy's turn. You're up, bitch. So at this point, he's weak as hell because he's been enduring months of torture. But as he climbed the ladder and the rope was placed around his neck, he found just enough energy to really stick it to the man and jump. So the rope tightened quickly and snapped his neck, killing him instantly, which to you and I were like, that's not great, but it's kind of great in this situation because this meant that he didn't have to go through feeling like his wiener being cut off, him being sliced open with his guts being ripped out. Like he beat them to it, okay? Which I think, anyways, Guy's body was then cut into 4 pieces and distributed to the 4 corners of the kingdom. Now this was to send a message to anyone else who dared try to take down King James. And if that wasn't enough, because it's never enough for these people, they even decided to add some home decor to the castle. They stuck prisoners' heads They were already dead, right? They take the heads of the prisoners and put them on spikes. Little kebab. And then line the bridge with them. Yep, they did that. So you know those like Halloween decorations you do every year? That was some real shit. Yeah. Now this, again, would instill fear into everyone who saw that shit. You want to send a message? I think that would send a message. At least for me, I'd be like, oh shit, is that a head on a stick? You don't see that every day. And there is something else we need to cover when it comes to the Tower of London. I just think it's so interesting that thousands of tourists visit that spot every day, stepping on the same stones that were once covered in the blood of tortured prisoners. And sure, the Duke's daughter was a brutal bitch, but one of the most popular devices of torture in the Tower of London wasn't actually a device at all. It was rats, like actual rats. Now, there were several ways rats would be used as a form of torture, but they would all end the same way. Rats would end up eating the human flesh. Now, these rodents were often used through the method known as the rat box. This is fun. I saw the pics. So first you tie up a prisoner on a flat surface. So, tie their arms and legs and all that jazz. Second, what you gotta do, or what they would do, is starve a bunch of rats, okay? So get some rats, don't feed them. Yeah, they're hungry. Okay, so then you're gonna stick the starving rats in like a bucket or something, and you're gonna walk over to the prisoner, dump the rats onto the prisoner's stomach, and then like you hold down the bucket, or you just kind of let them run free or whatever, because eventually what they're gonna do, these rats, they're not gonna start eating you at first because they're polite. So usually they'd have to like take some kind of heat, let's say like a torch, and they would kind of get it next to the rats, get the rats nice and toasty, either on the bucket, in the room, just get the rats irritated, hot, going. And after a few minutes, the rats are obviously going to start freaking out, thinking that they're in danger under all this heat and whatnot. So then they're going to try to chew their way out through the prisoner's stomach, of course. So you see, you're alive, and then rats are put on you, and then the rats eat you, like your stomach and stuff. If you Google the images, oh, bitch, you won't be able to sleep for days. Swear to God, don't look it up unless you're sick like me. So there was another version of this, which is they would stick a tube into a prisoner's butthole. Yeah. Sometimes into a vagina. They would put a tube in there. Then they would stick a hungry rat into the tube, close the tube, heat up the end, and guess what? You're gonna get eaten out. And not in a good way. And right now, if you are not clenching your butt cheeks together, I don't know what you're doing with your life, you sicko. Sometimes the guards were just straight up tired and didn't even care to stick around for the torture. So they'd open the prison doors filled with men and release a bucket of rats. And the rats would just go to town, eating the flesh of the prisoners until they got their fill and scurry away. Maybe this is the reason so many people are afraid of rats. Maybe it's been seared into our DNA. Or maybe they just look like they want to eat us, and this is proof that, they did at one point. Now, you can say a lot about people from medieval Europe, but you can't say that they weren't damn creative. And even though torture devices like the rack or the armchair of inquiries don't seem to be used anymore, torture is still definitely used as a way of getting information. And it's interesting that some of the oldest torture rules still apply. You remember Valerian? Remember him? Back in his day, you could only torture non-citizens, remember? Well, that still holds up. Maybe you've heard of a little place called Guantanamo. We don't have enough time to open that can of worms, but there's something interesting about who we feel we have the right to torture and what torture means to us today. At the end of the day, it just seems to me that human beings love hurting other human beings, but we don't torture like we used to. So I kind of feel like we've gotten a little better, but I could be completely wrong because I don't know everything, Let me know down below. Well, everyone, what'd you think? If you had to go out with one of these devices, which one would you go out with? I think I'd choose the squatty potty one or the boob snatcher because boobs grow back, I heard. It's like a lizard's tail. Once it's gone, it just grows right back. This is another side story, but I thought boobs growed back Wait, never mind, actually. We'll discuss that another day. Well, everyone, thank you for learning with me today. Remember, don't be afraid to ask questions to get the whole story because you deserve that. I'd love to hear your reactions to today's story, so make sure to use the hashtag Dark History so I can follow along. But I will say, side note, torture and torture devices is a hotly debated topic. A lot of people don't want to claim that their kings and queens or whoever used torture on one another. Some people say it was real, some say it was fake. I don't really care what you think about that hot debate, because there is proof that these torture devices, the ones that we at least mentioned here, were used once upon a time. So don't take it personally. It was a real thing. Look, history's fucked up and we're owning it. I don't think we should be doing it now, Okay, great. Join me over on my YouTube, where you can watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs. And while you're there, I don't know, maybe check out my murder, mystery, and makeup. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. You make good choices. Have a seat to my armchair of inquiries, maybe, but talk to you next week. Love ya. Bye, bitch. The other day, I heard someone say the phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. And I've heard that phrase before, but I thought I didn't really know what it meant. It was just like a phrase, right? Well, turns out it was actually a real thing. And no, it's not a bunch of paper cuts, which I assumed that's what it was. Because when you think about it, paper cuts hurt really bad, right? They're spicy. But death by 1,000 cuts was actually tied to an ancient torture practice called flaying. Now, flaying is the act of removing someone's skin. We mentioned flaying in our first ancient torture episode, and I'm sure in a few murder, mystery, and makeup episodes. If you watch, there's some flaying involved. But the torture method is actually called Ling Chur. And even though Ling Chur is tied to flaying, it's actually way worse. Flaying was all about slowly removing someone's skin, which sounds pretty awful. I'm sure we all can agree. Ling Chur was all about torturing someone by hacking off. Oh, really quick disclaimer. It's kind of gory today. We're going to talk about some meaty, juicy body parts. Do you know what I'm saying? Just letting you know. With that being said, Ling Chur was all about torturing someone by hacking off chunks of flesh all around the body. This practice actually started in ancient China. So Ling Chur started being used around 220 BC, and apparently it was so successful that by the mid-1300s AD, this was the most popular way of executing someone. But it wasn't just for anybody. Ling Chur was reserved for the worst kind of people, because you'd suffer for a really long time before actually dying. You want to talk about torture? This is torture. So it would be for people like traitors who betrayed their country, high profile murderers, and anyone who crossed Chinese royalty. There are a lot of historical accounts of Ling Chur, but I heard this one story that was what? So let me tell you about it. So this story happens in China in the 1500s. The emperor at the time died in a freak accident, and there was nobody in line to take over the throne. So the palace, they were scrambling. So they decided to turn to someone in the emperor's family, his cousin, who was 14 years old. His name is Jia Jing. Now, right from the jump, I had to really try on that. You know me, I butcher names all the time, so that was hard. Okay, but he's 14 years old, he's young, right? And right from the jump, this young emperor, he had a lot of pressure on him. He had no training to become an emperor. He was just a rich teenager with family connections. So a lot of people thought that he was actually way too young to rule, and they had and honestly they thought he had no idea what he was doing. Fair and valid. So the emperor decided to send a message to anyone who was doubting him. And they were look, if you doubt me, you will be exiled or you will be killed. If you have anything to say, you better say it right now, bitch. He wanted to be clear that he's not going to take shit from anyone. So he ended up torturing and killing hundreds of palace officials who, questioned him. Not long after this, the emperor started collecting concubines, aka sex workers. These women were essentially his live-in sex slaves, and they weren't even women, they were pretty much girls. The emperor had a preference for his concubines to be under the age of 15. they weren't just there for his sexual pleasure. These girls had another purpose to serve, because the emperor had a bizarre plan to live forever. Now, the emperor's biggest desire in life was to be immortal. Yeah, they always want that, huh? And he believed that there was some sort of magic that could help him achieve this. And this magic, he believed, would come from his teenage lovers. Aside from being a predator and being attracted to younger girls, there was like an added bonus to them being so young. So their youth made them pure. And he believed that purity was the key to immortality. And he's like, oh, if only you could bottle it. So in order to be immortal, the emperor creates a potion that he calls red lead. Yummy, sounds good. What's in it? Well, listen, okay? The emperor kept these young girls around to collect their menstrual blood. Menstruation. Oh, yes, menstruation. That's all right. So he did that. And then once he had enough, he'd put it like in a cup. He'd mix it with like a few other ingredients. And I guess he would drink it. We don't really know the details about how exactly he was collecting the period blood. And honestly, I was thinking maybe they actually invented the Diva Cup before the Diva Cup. Because how else was he getting it? Huh? Maybe. I don't know. And my thought was, why did he think that the menstrual blood specifically was going to do this? And why did he think to drink it? But let him do his thing. He genuinely believed that it was working, okay? I mean, every day he was waking up and he's like, not dead yet, so it must be working. Sadly, these young girls, they didn't have a choice. Once they were chosen, they had to service the emperor. Otherwise, they'd face poverty or death. So it's like, what are you going to choose? Yeah, I'll bleed in a cup. Sure. As the years go on, the emperor kind of starts to lose it. He becomes paranoid, violent, a little jumpy, you know? And in his violent moments, he would pick one of his girls to have them beaten to death in front of him. So while he was emperor, the emperor allegedly had over 200 of his girls beaten to death. These girls were sick and tired of this psychotic emperor, right? And plus, it's like, when are you next? I might be next. They gotta get rid of them. They're miserable. They're trapped. They needed to take action. Too bad they can't bleed out poison, kill them that way. In 1542, 16 of the emperor's lovers put their heads together to come up with a way out. They were going to kill the emperor and escape the palace. Great, do it, yeah. So one day they waited until the emperor felt safe in the company of one of his favorite young girls. Then, once his defenses were down and he had been in there for a while, doing stuff, they knocked on the door. They were like, how's it going in here? Do you guys need anything? Snacks? A condom? Period blood? Bam! They all jumped the emperor. Oh, yeah, you get him, girls, So they grabbed his arms, they grabbed his legs, and they hold him down. And then one of the girls takes a ribbon from her hair. Love that. She wraps it tight around his throat. She's like, ah! And she's strangling him. She's like, dying, motherfucker. And then after a few minutes, I guess, one of the girls loses her nerve. I don't know. This dumb girl, maybe she got scared because this is all she knew was this life. And she probably just got freaked out. But she loses it and she runs out and she goes to the emperor's wife. Her name was Fong. And she's like screaming at her like, oh my God, you need to come and see like what's happening. So by this point, the girls think that they've killed the emperor. But before they could escape, Empress Fong calls the palace guards in. So these guards all come in, they pull the women off of the emperor, and then they arrest the girls. So, to their horror, they watch as the guards revive the emperor. They're like, fuck, damn it. It turns out he wasn't dead. He was just unconscious. They were so close, and he was like in a coma-like state for the next few days. Empress Fong knew that her husband would want her to take care of business while he was in a coma. She's like, yeah, he definitely wants me to take over. He said that. He definitely told me I should do that. Really, do you really think he would want a woman in charge? Come on. Anywho, but look, she probably had some personal beef with like these women, you know? So, they were sleeping with her husband. So she saw like an opportunity for revenge. So she takes over, and Empress Fong decides to sentence all of the women to death, even the one who warned her or like let her know. It's kind of fucked up. Well, it's fucked up. So she went with the harshest punishment the law had to offer: lincture. First, the women were brought to the public part of the city. Then they were stripped naked and forcibly tied to a wooden post, totally exposed. And then the torture began. Now, the goal was to get the victims to stay alive for as long as possible so they could experience like the most pain. So one by one, each girl has her flesh hacked off. So they would start cutting at your thigh meat, your arms. They would cut the boobage, anywhere that there might be like extra flesh, because they want you to stay alive. They don't want to kill you. They would slowly work their way up to places like your heart, your face, and like your neck. Not the face. Then over the course of the next few days, chunks of their skin and flesh were hacked off piece by piece. Just enough for them to like feel horrible pain. The pictures are gross. People's bones and organs are like fully exposed and they're alive. It just looks awful. Awful. If they didn't die from bleeding out, they would die from infection, okay? And the crowd would apparently be like celebrating as these women cried out in pain. I get it, because to them, like these girls were seen as like traitors or whatever, So they're celebrating their slow death. And this was brutal, not only because of like what people physically would go through, but what it represents. I know, you're like, well, what does it represent, Bailey? Well, people believed that because lincture disfigured and dismembered your physical body, that you would never have a chance at being resurrected and or finding peace in the afterlife. So victims that were tied to those wooden posts were terrified to die because they really didn't know what would be waiting for them on the other side. As for the emperor, well, he lived, and he eventually woke up from his coma. And when Empress Fong told him that, she's like, I took care of business, babe, don't worry. Well, like I assumed, he was pissed. He's like, who put you in charge, bitch? He was upset. She had killed his favorite little girl without even asking him first. So a few years later, there was like a fire in the palace. And while palace officials were evacuating, the emperor ordered his men to let Empress Fong burn to death. It's not funny. It's just like, of course he did, because he is psycho. And that's what you get for trying to do something nice. Eventually, governments across the world were forced to acknowledge that lincture was just too brutal and it was outlawed. I was curious about other forms of royal torture because royals really were different. They have the money and power to come up with like any kind of torture device that they wanted. I feel like a lot of people in power are like either masochist or sadist, and like this kind of just proves that to kind of be true. Yeah. Anywho, but let me tell you, I came across like this other torture technique that just like made me barf a little. Did it? No. But it should have. It's dark. And it seems straight out of a movie. Well, not even. I don't even think a movie could come up with this. And the story of its creation takes a turn no one saw coming. So let me tell you about this next little situation, because this one truly is something of my nightmares. It lives rent-free in my head for sure. This, okay? Listen. So in the 6th century BC, Joan, when is 6th century? You don't know either? I should have Googled it. Anyhow, this guy named Phalaris, he was the ruler of this Greek colony called Acragas. The only thing we know about him is his legacy as a ruler. And every piece of writing we found on this guy tells the same story. He was a terrible person. The end. Nah, just kidding. So first of all, he was known to be like a tyrant a cruel, oppressive leader, over his people. He was power obsessed. He didn't play by the rules to get what he wanted, and he took what he wanted by violent force, including the throne. Years earlier, before his king era, Phalaris was hired to build a temple of Zeus near Acrogas. And he must have been stoked because the city was like popping off at the time, It was considered like the rich part of ancient Greece. So he's like, what? You want me to build a temple? Sick, So Phalaris was supposed to show up, build a temple, get his payment, and get the fuck out of there. So he shows up with a big group of workers, making it seem like he was taking the job seriously. But Phalaris had no plans to build that temple. He had secretly armed all of his workers so that they could take over the city. So Phalaris and his men violently take over, killing anyone who stood in their way. And Phalaris becomes the ruler of one of the richest parts of Greece. So the people of the city, they weren't stoked because they had known about this guy for a while and they knew that he had pretty questionable practices. So there was like rumors going around, and some of the rumors that were going around, well, one in particular was that this guy was a cannibal. Oh yeah. According to some writers from the 2nd century, he enjoyed eating sucklings, aka babies. Which is worse, babies or menstruation? Would you rather eat babies or drink period blood? Let me know down below. Okay, so he liked to eat babies, allegedly. Rumors. People were like, oh, I heard that Phalaris actually killed and ate his own son. I know. I wonder what he ate first. The legs, the arms, the head? I don't know. A famous Roman philosopher. Cicero. You get it? Chicago? Okay, no? All right. So, Roman philosopher, his name's Cicero. Cicero described Phalaris as someone whose, quote, cruelty is notorious beyond that of all others. Wow, you think? Okay. So some people believe that like these accounts of him being a cannibal were actually just a metaphor for what an awful and terrifying leader he was. But it's repeated so many times in ancient texts, it's like, meh, there's gotta be some truth in there. Maybe, I don't know. But Phalaris had quite the reputation in town. So he had a kink for torture. What do you call that? Now, is this masochism or is this sadism? Because I always mix up the two. But he had, he liked torture. He got off on it. And he enjoyed executing people in like slow, terrible ways. So one writer said, quote, Phalaris was cruel in his designs and even more cruel in his executions. He perpetrated all kinds of outrages on innocent people. People that worked for him were like walking on eggshells all the time because everyone's afraid, like, don't piss him off. He will chop your head off and eat your body. Like, I don't know. And the only way to gain favor with someone like Phalaris was to impress him with something awful. You're like, look, I brought a dead baby. Here you go. This is where a man named Perillus walked in. Now, Perillus and Phalaris already, technically, they know each other. I mean, their names are so similar, they kind of have like a Cheech and Chong thing going on. But maybe that's why Phalaris didn't like him, because their name was so similar, and he's like, there can only be one. So Perillus is apparently the royal sculptor. So he makes like all the pottery and the statues and the stuff that we dig up and we put in museums. He was doing that. And he would do this for Phalaris. So he was cool with Phalaris. They knew each other. He was like, hey, love that pot you made me. And Phalaris asked him like for a meeting. He's like, hey, I want to meet with you. I have an idea. So Phalaris comes in and is like, my tyrant, would you like another torture device? And Phalaris is, I guess, boner alert, He's like, what? Yeah. So I guess all of his old torture methods just weren't doing it for him anymore. He was bored. He wanted to spice it up a little. He's like, I need something new. So Phalaris knew if Perillus was brave enough to offer to make a new torture device, that he would take it seriously. Because if Perillus didn't impress him, he knew he could be sentenced to death. So Perillus goes back to his little place, and he is like brainstorming. He's got to come up with some real dark shit. Maybe he smokes a little bit of the devil's lettuce. He's like, I need some inspo. So he knew whatever he made, it had to be unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. And most importantly, it had to be torturous. It had to be brutal. It had to be bad. It had to be the worst of the worst. It had to be awful, creative, dark, and murderous. So Perilous is done, and then he returns to Phalaris. So Perilous is like, close your eyes, no peeking, okay? I got a surprise. And then the servants, they roll something in. Phalaris is like, what is it? I can't wait, oh my God. And then, Phalaris is like, okay, open your eyes. And Phalaris, he is shocked. It's so beautiful. It's a big statue of a bull. He's like, okay, great. I love this bull, but what is it? Well, Perilous explains, okay, he calls it the brazen bull. So brazen means made of bronze. And it's not a statue. Nay. It's a torture device. He's like, okay, I'm drooling. Tell me more. But he shows him the backside of the statue because that's where there's a door. Well, okay, look. If we want to get technical here, there are some people who say the door was like on the butt, and then some say it was on the bull's side. But there's a door, okay? And Phalaris, he opens up the door. He shows him like inside, and it's hollow. And it's just like a big empty space. And Phalaris is like, what? Like, I don't get it. Like, what? Is this a pinata? Like, I don't understand. So Perilous explains. He's like, listen, here's what you do. You take your victim, you tie them up, and then you force them through the door. And then you shut the door. And then you lock them into this brazen bull. And then it's like, okay, and? Well, then you light a fire underneath the bull statue, and the bronze heats up. The whole thing, because it's made of bronze, right? So the whole thing heats up, slowly burns and cooks the person alive. So Phalaris is like, okay, love, but not really seeing the vision. And then in that moment, I guess, Perilous was like, oh, just you wait because I'm not done yet. So Perilous tells him, he's like, look, the best part, well, it's kind of fun. It's like a nice little treat. He tells him that when you close the person inside and you start roasting them alive, naturally, they're gonna scream. Well, inside the bull, there are these complicated tubes. It kind of looks like a tuba. It connects to the bull's mouth. Okay, got it? So when someone is screaming in pain, because they're slowly burning to death, their screams go through these tubes, and it turns into like a roar that comes out of the bull's mouth. That's art. He's like, wow, you really went off, You made all those pots and plates and stuff, and this is what you make next? Like, that's creativity right there. Do you know what a bull sounds like? Because I didn't. So YouTubed it. So it's kind of like this deep, haunting moo. It's like, wah! Wait, no. Wah! I honestly kind of nailed it. So when the person is cooking inside, these tubes make it sound like it's a bull yelling. That's different, right? Like, that's a special kind of fucked up. That's dark. So for a little moment, Phalaris is like, oh my God, love. He's loving it. He is in shock that Perilous perfectly nailed what he was looking for. He's like, the bull basically takes away their humanity as they die. Perfect. I love that. So legend has it, Phalaris' mood, takes a turn. Some say he was disgusted with the device, and others say he was actually jealous that he didn't think of this idea himself. Get this. He was ready to see how this bull worked. So Phalaris goes to Perilous, and he's like, hey, can you demonstrate how the bull noise works? Because I don't get it. So Perilous is like, oh my God, yeah, like for sure, I'll show you. So he gets inside. He's like, okay, see, the horns are here. Watch. Whatever. Phalaris shuts the door. And Perilous starts to yell to demonstrate the noise. According to legend, Phalaris lights a fire underneath the bull and listens to the bull roar as Perilous slowly burns to death. I guess he wanted to see it in action, Phalaris. He's like, I want a real demonstration, so let me just do it. In some versions of this story, he pulls Perilous out when he's half cooked and throws him off of a cliff. Scholars say that Phalaris used this torture method on his worst enemies. I'm rolling my eyes because it's like, I'm sure he's probably like, that guy, put him in, you know? But when someone was inside and they were getting cooked and the bull would roar, I guess you could hear it all throughout the city. And Phalaris, oh, he loved it. He loved the theater of it all, the performance. It was beautiful. And he loved terrifying people. So he's like, this is great. This is beautiful. This is art. So after Phalaris dies, they think it's around 554 BC, the people of the city stormed the temple. So I guess together they picked up the brazen bull. They hauled it outside and they threw it into the ocean. It's such a bummer that, they couldn't put him in the bull himself and torture him, huh? Bummer. But the reason that we know about the brazen bull is because of the many tales that have been written about it throughout history. And some people don't necessarily blame Phalaris for using it. He's a psychopath. If you give a psychopath a cookie, they're probably going to eat it, Instead, people blame Perilous for inventing it in the first place, which is so dumb. Well, I mean, that's an interesting take, because when you think about, do you blame the guy who invented it or do you blame the guy who used it? I think we can blame both of them and call them both sick, but it's just, I don't know, whatever. So I guess no piece of the actual bull has ever been found. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to the torture museum, and they have a replica of the brazen bull, and it's huge and it's terrifying. But yeah, they actually have never found a piece of the real thing. So some people actually kind of think it's fake. Moral of the story, people are sick. So, brazen bull, real or not? I think it is. So the next form of torture is probably the simplest form of torture that we've talked about today. There are no bells, whistles, or bowls. But I think that's what makes it kind of way worse. In the late 400s BC in ancient Persia, there were two brothers, Cyrus and Artaxerxes. But we're going to call him Arta, because it's easier for me. I'm so sorry. So Arta, listen, he was sometimes called the mindful because he was usually very gentle and thoughtful. I mean, at least in comparison to his brother. Cyrus was the younger brother, so he was the favorite. So Cyrus and Arta were both royalty because their father was king of Persia. So their dad dies. They're like, no. But naturally, Arta, who's the oldest, was set to take the throne. But his mom was not happy about this. She was like, I want Cyrus, my favorite son, to take over. But because he was the youngest, that was out of the question. On the day that Arta was set to take the throne, there's an incident. So a priest rushes in and tells Arta that he thinks Cyrus is planning to kill him so that he could be king. So the priest runs in there. He's like, Arta, Cyrus is waiting for you in the other room, and when you walk in there, he's gonna jump you. This priest, he knew Cyrus really well, and he's a priest. So Arta is like, I believe you. So Arta sends guards to find Cyrus. So the guards go looking and they find him in the other room, exactly where the priest said he would be. So it's not a great look. But also he's like, hey priest, good job. But Arta is spooked. He's like, my brother's trying to freaking kill me. So he decides to have his brother executed. I mean, look, even if Cyrus wasn't going to kill him that day, he probably would try to someday. So just, get rid of him. So Arta is set on executing him. But before he could, his mom rushes in and she's panicking. She pleads with Arta. She's like, please don't kill Cyrus. He's my baby boy. I love him, whatever. So he's like, fine, Mom. And he listens. So he's like, look, I won't kill him. I'll just banish him. You happy with that, Mom? She's like, okay, yeah. So Cyrus gets banished. Great. Things are great. Things are fine. King Arta is ruling. The empire is at peace. But then Cyrus comes back around. Now, Cyrus, while he was banished, he had a lot of time to think about some things. What else are you going to do when you're banished, But Cyrus couldn't stop thinking about what Arta had done to him. I mean, there wasn't any evidence that he was going to kill Arta. It was just a rumor from a priest. And priests are known to lie. So he was pissed. So a couple years go by, he's thinking, he's like, F my brother, He tells himself, like, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to take the throne. I'm going to do whatever it takes to have the throne, and I don't even care if I die trying. At this time, he was living in Greece. Now, Greece had fought Persia decades before, so there was like some beef between the two countries. So it's not hard for Cyrus to find people and like build up an army that's ready to fight the Persians. He's like, hey, aren't you still mad at Persia? Me too. Join my army. So he builds up his own army and they decide to invade Persia. Him and his army, they destroy anyone and everything that's like in their way. And he has one goal: to get to the palace and kill his brother. Now the journey from like Greece to Persia is long, so word gets back to Arta that Cyrus is on his way to kill him. So Cyrus is like, all right, okay, well, I gotta be ready to fight. Finally, Cyrus reaches the front of the palace, and who's there waiting for him? Arta. And the two of them just go at it. They're on horseback, throwing spears at each other. I mean, it's wild. So they both end up wounding each other. And apparently Cyrus gets hit and his horse freaks out, starts running around, all crazy. Cyrus is stuck on the horse, so he's just getting like tossed around like a salad. So a soldier who works for Arta sees Cyrus, and he doesn't know that Cyrus is Arta's brother. So the soldier is like, I just need to protect my king. So the soldier stabs Cyrus in the head with a spear. So Cyrus falls off the horse, he bleeds out, and then he dies. Now Cyrus's death ends the battle and the whole invasion. I know what you're thinking. You're like, Bailey, what? That's not torture. That's just a spear in the head. And you're right. Because, plot twist, Cyrus isn't the one who gets tortured. Oh, nay. It's his killer. So Arta finds the soldier who killed Cyrus. His name was Mithridates. He's just like a regular soldier, no biggie. And I guess this is like a very big problem for Arta. You see, this random soldier killing his brother does not make the king look strong. It makes him look weak. Arta's like, I'm the one who should have killed him, not you. Who the fuck are you? He's like really upset about this. So the king strikes up a deal with this guy. He's like, look, I'll give you a bunch of jewels and some treasure if you just tell people that I killed him and not you. I mean, he doesn't want people to know like what really happened because it will make him look weak. After the battle, there's a banquet, and Mithridates shows up all decked out. He's wearing like all his jewels and stuff. He's like, look, Towards the end of the banquet, someone goes up to Mithridates and was like, oh my God, like, you look so good. Like, how'd you get so rich? I just saw you the other day. Like, you were just like sweeping, like, what happened? So Mithridates is like, oh, like, wouldn't you like to know? He's like bragging, whatever. He's being annoying. Those people when you ask them something and they're like, they do that, they're being vague. or giving you an answer with a question, and you're like, yeah, I would like to know. That's why I asked. And you're just like, just tell me. It's annoying. So he was doing that. He was being that bitch. So then, in front of like the whole party, after a few like goblets too many, Mithridates, he's like, okay, he's probably like drunk, he's like, okay, I'm just gonna say it. I did it. I killed Cyrus, and the king paid me to keep quiet. And then, so he says this loudly, and everybody hears, and everyone was like, oh, So he says this drunk, stupid, being sloppy. And even though he just spilled like literally the hottest tea ever, unfortunately, he also insulted the king in front of everyone. And at the banquet, there were some high up advisors and also his mommy. He looked bad. The king looked bad. I guess mom is pissed off because she just found out who really killed her favorite son. So she tells Arda, like, look, however you punish this guy, make it harsh. So the king arrests Mithridates and he sentences him to death, which doesn't make sense. Like, he helped you out, but whatever. And of course, like, it couldn't be something simple like, I don't know, beheading, no biggie. He instead sentences him to something called scaphism. Now, this is where it gets a little nasty. Apparently, death by scaphism is also called the boats. I know. At first, I was like, the boats? Is this like a cute little boat ride to the afterlife? Like, do they put your dead body in a boat and like send you down the river? Because that's kind of cute, but no. Okay, scaphism is where someone would build a wooden box around your torso. I don't know, because based off the pictures, it looks like it's around your whole body, and then your arms, your head, and your legs are sticking out. So it's like you're a turtle, and it's your turtle shell. And all around you is this wooden box. And you're like, you can't move. You're just locked in here, okay? So Mithridates is put into this wooden shell and then floated in the water on his back. And he's looking directly at the sun every day. He can't move. He can't cover his eyes. Nothing, right? He's force-fed a bunch of food. And it's like, sure, you can refuse to eat it, but if you refuse to eat it, some bozos swim out and like stab you in the eyes. So next, they would pour a mixture of milk and honey all over him. And then they would also like get in those little holes and then like pour it inside the wooden shell that he's trapped in. At first you're like, ooh, cute, like slippery. But really, he's just sitting in the sun, full of food, covered in milk and honey. It's like, okay, where's this going? But then you think about it. Bugs. Bugs start appearing, and they are loving this. They're like, ooh, food, delicious. And they start feasting. Apparently, bugs would cover the body so fast that you couldn't even see this guy's face anymore. So his eyes are completely covered by bugs eating the milk and honey and chewing into his face. Then the bugs, they start eating the parts of his body trapped inside the boat. You're like, well, that sucks. I know, but we're not done. Because listen, remember all the food that they were forced to eat? Well, it's gotta come out, So guess what? Yep, they purposely fed him food that would give him major diarrhea. So he starts pooping himself inside this wooden shell. And he's just filling this little shell with diarrhea. And that causes the boat to smell, hot sun, diarrhea, bugs, milk and honey. It's just like, ugh. And then your arms and your legs are stuck. So it's like, think of bugs like crawling all over you and you can't like itch it or swat it away. And then you have diarrhea all over you. Yeah, that's torture. And then like, more bugs show up because they love diarrhea. They're like, this is great. Bugs are just like, nom, 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 nom. There's a lot going on. What kind of bugs? Well, if you must know, worms, beetles, bugs that love poop, bugs. And for like a little while, these bugs just live in the poop. And they're like, poop. Sorry. Poop. And this whole thing isn't just gross and uncomfortable, it's gonna kill you. because after a while, your poop isn't enough for these bugs. So they start just like going to the source, aka your butthole. Yeah. So these worms, they start crawling all inside you and they start eating you until you die. And this method of torture can last for days. Now, allegedly, Mithridates, it took him like 17 days to die. Like, who thought of this? Especially the diarrhea part. Like, that's okay. All right. So look, if you were going to be tortured to death, which one would you choose? That's a good question. Let me think about this. I don't want to do the bull because that just sounds like awful and like, but then the boat with the diarrhea and then the flaying. I can't think of an answer actually, but let me know what you choose. Baby or menstrual blood? Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like I just watched 3 horror movies in a row. Or listened to 3 horror movies in a row. It's hard to believe that these ancient torture techniques aren't just something from like a movie, right? All 3 of the torture methods we talked about today were real and they happened to real people. Diarrhea boat, real. Bull, real. Filet mignon, real. Now, watching the torture was actually a form of entertainment to people. I don't blame them. There wasn't much to do back then. I think the reason that it's not discussed in textbooks is because 1, it's shameful, and 2, it probably gives people ideas. But I think we can all agree that this is fucked up, and that's what we're all about here at Dark History. Anywho, today's episode was wild. I know it's hard to only pick 3. We can go on and on and on and on about torture techniques. There's so many, it's never ending. These people were fucked up. These people were gross. I thought we were gross nowadays, you know? No, I mean, yes, we are. But like, ugh. That's different. Thank you for hanging out with me. Did you know you can join me over on my YouTube where you can actually watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs? And while you're there, you can also catch my murder, mystery, and makeup. And don't forget to subscribe because I'm here for you with new content all the time. I'd love to hear your guys' reactions to today's story, so make sure to leave a comment down below so I can see what you guys are saying. I can't wait to read this comment section. I'm sure it'll be great. And your comment might even be featured in a future episode. Now let's read a couple of comments that you guys have left me. Alex Bose 305 left us a comment saying, "Perfect timing for my lunch break, LOL, eating my rolled tacos in my car and watching Dark History." Well, Alex, I hope you aren't eating lunch while listening to this episode. If you are, I'm sorry. Don't hate me. What kind of tacos are you eating? Oh, rolled tacos. What kind of meat? And what do you put on your taco? What kind of car? What's your social security, first last name, date of birth, address, mother's maiden name, first animal name? Just let me know. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. I hope you had a good lunch. Jasmine Parnell 7697 left me a comment saying, "I love watching your channel. My husband watches your channel when he's away from home to go to sleep because it makes him miss home a little bit less." Jasmine, thank you so much for your comment. That is very sweet. Tell your husband hi. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Does he fall asleep when he's watching? I hear I put a lot of people to sleep. Now, I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a bad thing. I'll take it. Whatever. You know, that's okay. That's fine. Anywho, thank you for watching. I appreciate you and love ya, bitch. I don't know. Thank you. Lisa Mercer 8651 left us an episode suggestion saying, "The Dark History of Google. How does Google know everything?" Lisa. This is a great idea. It's kind of funny that I would have to Google the history of Google. So I'm not sure how that would work. I will look into this though, because that's not a bad idea. I think it'd make for an interesting episode because Google started off as one thing and now where it is today is completely different than what they originally stood for. And that could make a really interesting episode. You know, I'm pissing off so many people here at Dark History. I'm gonna get murdered, aren't I? Yeah. Anywho, Love you guys for watching. I also appreciate you for commenting and engaging. And don't forget to leave a comment because maybe you'll be featured in a future episode. And hey, if you don't know, Dark History is an Audio Boom original. A special thank you to our expert, Dr. Nancy Park, Professor of History, California State University, East Bay. And I'm your host, Bailey Sarian. I hope you have a good day, you make good choices. Be safe out there. And I'll be talking to you guys later. Goodbye! If you don't know anything about me, I'm going to tell you my deepest, darkest secret. I am addicted to candy, sugar, all of it. It's really hard for me to explain how much I love candy. Like, no matter where I'm at, a sweet treat is always within reach. See? Right here. I love candy. I need it every day. But there is this other side to candy, a dark, horrific side. You know, maybe you've heard of it. People always say during Halloween, like, be careful of razor blades and needles in your candy. And you're like, shut up, Grandma. I'm gonna take that risk, okay? Or maybe you've been told don't take candy from strangers, but that defeats the whole purpose of Halloween. But in reality, it's the people that we are close to that we really need to just keep an eye on. In fact, that's the whole reason why the rumor of poisoned Halloween candy even exists. And it's all because of a man named Ronald Clark O'Brien. And fun fact, if you want more information on Ronald Clark O'Brien, I did a murder mystery and makeup on him. So I'll link it down below, check it out. But back in 1974, an 8-year-old boy named Timmy, it's not funny, it's just a funny name, you don't hear that often. Timmy went trick-or-treating. And he came home that night with a bunch of candy, as one does, and he's just like, yeah, you know? So he ends up eating a pixie stick. But little did poor Timmy know that it was laced with cyanide. Bitch, poor freaking, this is a true story, because poor Timmy didn't take long. Boom, dead. Of course, everyone blamed the Halloween candy, but in reality, he didn't get the laced candy from a random stranger. Get this. Apparently, Timmy's dad, Ronald, well, he was $100K in debt, and his plan was to fix that problem, right? So what do? Well, a dumbass guy like him, he takes out a life insurance policy on his kids, and he's like, I'm gonna collect the money once they died, because I'm gonna give them poison candy. Like, he really thought about this, and he tried it. And to throw off investigators, Ronald slipped the poison candy in the Halloween bags of other kids around town, so people wouldn't think like it was him. Thankfully, none of those kids liked pixie sticks, including his daughter. But sadly, we can't say the same for poor Timmy. Now, this whole ordeal reignited a fear in Americans that candy can be deadly. And this isn't like a one-off example. There have been several times throughout history where killer sweets have destroyed a lot of lives. So let me tell you this first story, okay? Because it's wild. It takes place in an English town called Bradford. And okay, listen, it's October of 1858. So try and imagine that in your brain. The Industrial Revolution is going off, and it's really changed everything. Businesses were just popping up everywhere, and people were trying to take advantage of the holiday season and make some money, right? So they're just like, yeah, I shined shoes, make a store out of it, just whatever. So on October 30th of 1858, it's like the day before Halloween, people are already celebrating, walking around in like costumes, people are having wild parties and just celebrating, you know? Everyone's probably smelled like shit because there's no such thing as deodorant yet. It was wild. Anyway, a local candy seller, his name was William Hardacker, was looking to offload some of his holiday candy, right? So he sets up shop at a local market, and he's selling like a ton of this one-striped peppermint flavored candy. It's like something you would get at like a doctor's, not ideal, you know? But it was called humbugs, like bah humbug. They loved them back then because they didn't have taste yet. And William, he was actually known for his humbug candies. And in town, he would like go by the name Humbug Billy. So people would like flock to him for this special treat. William was selling these humbugs at a huge discount because the candy he was selling, it kind of had a weird discoloration to them. So they're like, quote unquote, defective, you know? So he's like, I should just sell them at half price and just kind of get them gone. And they must have tasted fine because he was going to try and like sell this candy no matter what. And of course, people love a sale and they bought a ton of them. By the end of the day, William had sold 5 pounds of the humbug candies. And then the next morning, it was Halloween, right? Woo, the big day is finally here. In the town of Bradford, normally, or is supposed to be going about their business and celebrating as usual, but this time the town was in a panic. Go on, you say, what? That very night, 2 young boys had died suddenly in their home. What? I know. Even though like it wasn't uncommon for children to like suddenly die of disease back then, which is super sad, right? But like these 2 were different and people were still feeling uneasy about it. So the police, they get involved and they originally thought the kids had died of cholera, which was everywhere at the time. But the boys, who were only 2 and 11, they at the time were perfectly healthy. So it was just super confusing and none of it made sense. The parents of the boys were scrambling for answers, right? They were remembering the day before with the boys, like, what had we done? What happened, you know? And they're thinking, and they realize, like, oh my God, both of the boys ate that weird colored humbug candy, right? And they're putting it together and they're like, oh my God, they did. So they're thinking, they're like, oh my God, it's gotta be this candy. That's the only thing that makes sense. But they needed to connect the candy to the kid's death because it was just like a thought, you know? So the father and another young man in the house decide to test the candy for poison. But again, this was 1858 and it's not like they're chemists or anything, you know? And the only way they could determine if the candy was poisoned or not was to eat it. Bold. I know. So the father and his buddy pop the candy in their mouths and they're sucking on it, you know? And not long after, both of them were bending over in pain. And they're like, oh my God, right? And then following that, they were struck by this intense diarrhea. Woo! It was shooting out their ass, you know? Wow, they're just glued to that toilet. Well, word got out that these 2 men were sick from this candy. So people they're starting to put it together and they're realizing, oh my God, like my kid ate this candy. And another person's like, my kid ate this candy. And next thing you know, tons of people are realizing that their kids and some adults had eaten the candy and many were getting sick. Oh shit. So it turns out that this candy was actually poison. What the hell, humbug, Bill? Was such a betrayal. The Candyman is trying to kill us all? Well, with so many cases of candy poisoning popping up all over town, again, the authorities, they got to get involved on like a bigger scale. So they start tracking down the nausea, the pain, and diarrhea symptoms of the survivors. Officers spend the whole next day and night rushing around town, knocking on people's doors, warning them not to eat this candy. And it didn't take long for the police to kind of put 2 and 2 together and think, poison. Apparently, along with diseases like cholera, poisoning was pretty common at the time. Did you remember aqua tofana? Yeah, it was common, okay? Accidental and intentional poisonings usually happened so often because buying poison at the time was very easy. It was like as common as buying a carton of milk from the store. So you're like, hey, I want to kill my husband today. You just go get that poison. That easy. Now, one of the most common poisons sold at the time was arsenic. Arsenic could be purchased from your local corner store without even a question followed. Like no one was keeping track of who bought it or looked at them sideways if they did buy it. I mean, think about it. If you did that today, you'd end up on a list somewhere, you know? But not back then. I guess people all over Victorian England would use arsenic as rat poison. Oopsie. Arsenic is like a white powdery substance, and it really was the perfect poison if you were trying to kill something or someone. because arsenic, I guess it has like a slightly sweet, non-toxic taste sprinkled on top of like cereal, something, It got me thinking, it was like, oh, it's kind of like antifreeze. I do a lot of murder mysteries, you guys. So I'm like, yeah, antifreeze. I hear that's sweet too. So if someone wanted to sprinkle a little bit in your food, you honestly probably would not notice. Many people during that time period were known for eating very heavy, rich, sugary foods. So shitting yourself was pretty common, and it was a regular thing. So the symptoms you would have right after eating the poison, to some, were pretty standard for Victorian England. The vomiting and diarrhea. I just love that, right? Vomiting and diarrhea being kind of norm. Just funny. But what I'm getting at is that no one's mind would automatically think arsenic poisoning, Now, on top of all that, if you poison someone with arsenic, it would be pretty difficult to trace it back to the person who sold it and when it was used. Everything kind of depended on the memory of the arsenic salesperson. Now, all of this is just talking about the intentional arsenic poisonings. But at the time, there were about 1 million normal uses of arsenic that could lead to accidental death. I mean, it was everywhere. It was used in glass making, to clothes dye, to wallpaper, Even doctors found it really useful. They would put small amounts of it in medicinal concoctions because it was said to help stimulate the blood. We can giggle now. They were so silly, weren't they? So during the investigation, the authorities are trying to put like all these pieces together and track down who the hell sold these humbugs. And eventually the trail leads to this man named William and his little candy stall. I mean, his nickname was Humbug Billy. But when authorities went to William's home to have a little talk with them, they found him absolutely sick to his stomach in bed. I guess he himself had a few of the weird colored candies and was paying a hefty price. So the authorities, they knew it was the candies that made people sick, but they didn't believe William was like, an evil child killer. So they decided to find out how the hell these candies were made. And sure as shit, they found their answer because the main culprit was sugar. Oh, no. I know. Sugar is outside your window right now waiting for you. If you listened to our episode about sugar, you might remember how expensive it was back in the day. And the Brits, they just loved it. And they were even addicted to it. But the sugar making process was complicated and even expensive. So many candy manufacturers would mix real sugar with cheaper stuff in order to have more of it. They essentially cut the sugar with other powdered material like limestone, I know, plaster of Paris, which I was like, what's that? It sounds so fancy. Or a soft mineral substance named gypsum. Even though to us we're like, you put tile in my sugar? Back then, it wasn't a huge deal. They were like, oh my God, I love limestone. They would even call these half mystery powder mixtures DAF. So when police were doing their investigation, they realized that the candies were produced using DAF, the weird sugar mixture. Humbug Willie had purchased the candies from a wholesale candy seller, and his name was Joseph Neal. A couple of weeks before the sale, Joseph had sent his employee to purchase DAF from his local pharmacist. I know, I guess that's where they would get it. Now, unfortunately, the pharmacist, he was sick that day. So he had to have one of his newer, less experienced employees take over for the day and handle this order. When Neal's employee came in asking for DAF, the apprentice, I guess he got all sorts of confused as to what was in what bin. He's like, I know DAF is white powdery and yeah, I know that. So he knew he had to get him a white powdery substance. I mean, that's DAF, right? So he measured out 12 pounds of white powder from an unlabeled bin nearby and handed it over to the employee for the humbugs. But the pharmacist, he didn't realize that he had just given this person 12 pounds of pure arsenic. Whoopsie. It kind of reminded me when you are going for a job interview and you lie and you say you know how to use Excel, but really you don't. And then you show up for the job and you're like, yeah, I totally know what I'm doing. And you just start like guessing. It's like that, but not like that, because this obviously killed people. I'm sure he couldn't use this job as a reference, is what I'm saying. So this guy, he gets that DAF, right? Well, he thinks it's DAF, but it's really arsenic. And that was then added to the candy mixture by William. And when they came out that weird color, William, he honestly didn't think much about it, you know? It's just kind of like it happens from time to time. And that's why he felt confident in selling them at a discount and even treating himself to a few. So by this point, authorities, they were trying to get the word out all over Bradford. They went door to door and posted written warnings in like public locations saying like, these candies are poison, don't eat them. I mean, they tried their best. But in the end, a total of 20 people died from eating the poisoned humbugs. 20! Sadly, 13 of them were children and 7 were adults. The youngest victim was only 17 months old. Around 200 other people got seriously ill. And when a professional inspected the candy, they found out that each humbug contained more than enough arsenic to kill a grown man. Oh shit, you know? So, the 200 people who got seriously sick from the candy but survived were considered very lucky. The authorities quickly pointed the finger at the new pharmacy employee who fucked up, you know? I mean, the guy had only been working for like 3 weeks, so whoopsie, but his careless mistake was what led to the deaths of 20 people. So the authorities, they end up arresting this guy, the pharmacist, as well as Peter Neal, the candy maker, for the crimes. Now, listen, this trial was highly publicized, and the whole debacle became known as the Bradford Sweets poisoning of 1858. The prosecution was not able to show that a law was broken by any of these men. Yes, it was an unfortunate and preventable accident, but it was not done with any intentions to harm any of the poor people who died. I mean, we're all thinking it, I hope. This all could have been prevented with a label. Maybe taking a marker and wrote on the bin like, hey, poison, you know? But nobody comes to me for these answers. So this meant that like nobody was ever held accountable for the poisoned humbugs. Which kind of had me confused because I don't know. I want to hear what you guys think. Like if they should have been charged, should they be accountable for an accident, but an accident that killed 20 people? Right? I don't know. But there was a silver lining. I mean, 10 years after the poisoning, a law called the Pharmacy Act of 1868 was passed. And this required that poisons be stored and sold in specific bottles made of colored glass so that shop workers and customers would be sure they knew what they were getting, you know? Now, some poisons also required specific labels. Oh, finally, what an idea. And now when people purchased poison, the shop workers also had to take note in case of any type of poisoning. I mean, people were still able to purchase their arsenic and use it, but at least this new law would help to avoid little accidents from happening again. So even though like no one served jail time for the 20 deaths that occurred in Bradford, this tragedy did help to make it more difficult to accidentally poison a bunch of children on Halloween for decades to come. So it's a little bit of a win. I'd say a big win because they started labeling shit. Like, what an idea. But candy isn't just dangerous when it's potentially poisoned. It turns out it can be a lethal force of nature. Let me tell you, this next story, when I heard about it, I was like, excuse me? Huh? What? This is not on my bingo card. And also, it created a new fear in me. It left me with an irrational fear of molasses. On January 15th, 1919, Boston was having a weirdly warm day. I mean, look, it was the dead of winter and it was 40 degrees. And you're like, oh my God, that's so cold. Because I was thinking that too. I was like, 40 degrees, that's freezing. I can't handle that. Just for comparison, the day before, it had only been 2 degrees. So on this day, it was 40 degrees. How did that happen? You know, it was a really big shift. 1919 was a really weird year. If you've been paying attention on dark history, it seems like all the weird shit happened in 1919. Point blank period, I just want to say that. Let it be known. Thank you. Put it on record. Okay, back to the story. While the people of Boston were enjoying the nice weather, because it's 40 degrees, they had no idea that this sunny day was about to cost them their lives. In the north end of Boston, there was like this big factory called the Purity Distilling Company. And I guess one of the things they were distilling there was molasses. Me personally, for the longest time, I thought molasses was like grass. It's not grass. Molasses is this thick, black, almost glue-like substance, and it stinks. But it can be like made from sugar cane or sugar beets, and it's usually used to sweeten and flavor foods. So over at Purity Distilling, they had a massive tank of molasses. And when I say massive, I'm not kidding. I mean, this bitch could hold over 2.5 million gallons of molasses. Now, allegedly, this tank had been leaking for some time. Now, this was not ideal, and I guess Purity Distillery employees had pointed this out to the higher-ups on multiple occasions because it was considered a hazard. So instead of, fixing the leak, the owners came up with a brilliant idea. They decided to just paint the tank the same color as the molasses leaking out of it to camouflage it. No one can tell it's leaking now because it's all the same color. We did it, you guys. Yeah. This is like when a landlord just paints over all the mold you've been complaining about for weeks. And they're like, what mold? We got rid of it. Anyway, the tank was painted, but the leak was never fixed. I mean, so much so to the point where it became known that local kids would come collect the free molasses from the edges of the tank, fill her up. Oh yeah. But on that day in January, you did not want to be licking that tank or be anywhere near it. A batch of hot molasses had recently been added to this big bin thing. And I guess the heat from this new batch, plus the rapid change in the weather, created a ton of pressure within the tank, okay? Pressure. And it's not good. Now, because the structure was already leaky, it just could not handle what was going on. Inside the tank, the pressure is building and building and building, enough to cause an explosion. At 12:30 p.m., that's exactly what happened. The sound of the explosion was said to be deafening. So the metal from the tank and the rivets just explode into thousands of pieces of steel that just flew into the air like bullets at an insane speed, tearing straight through nearby buildings. One huge piece of the tank went flying into the railroad, causing the tracks to collapse. One family, the Lentoscas, were Italian immigrants living on Commercial Street, just down the road from Purity Distilling. Just before the disaster, Giuseppe was looking out of the second floor window while his son, Pasquale, who was 10 years old, he was outside collecting firewood, and he was doing so right next to the molasses tank. Whoa, I know. Now, it was hard to miss him because the little boy, he was wearing this super bright red sweater, and, so it was easy to spot him. He stood out. And again, it was just like a normal day. So Giuseppe's watching, whatever, and then just out of nowhere, Giuseppe kind of looks back at the window, and that's when he sees a huge tsunami wave of molasses coming at him. What? Yeah. I was thinking molasses wouldn't explode because it's so thick, dense, and glue-like. It's hard to imagine it exploding, but you have to believe me when I say the molasses literally turned into a huge tsunami wave and oh no, it was not good, okay? The molasses that exploded out of this tank created a tidal wave that was believed to have been 25 feet high and 165 feet wide. What? Huh? Yeah, that's big. That's real big. Since the molasses was warm and the pressure inside the tank was intense, it moved fast. The wave tore through the town, moving at 35 miles per hour, like freaking lava. Giuseppe saw the wave engulf his son, but it only took a couple of seconds before the wave reached the building that he was in. So it comes through the building, whatever, and it knocks Giuseppe unconscious. Oh, fuck. Like, is that scary? Because molasses is so thick, it'd probably just like suffocate you. Oh my God. Giuseppe and his son, like, they weren't alone. The wave engulfed the north end of Boston. The local firehouse, which was like right next to the distilling plant, was ripped right off of its foundation, and the whole building almost ended up in the nearby harbor. Other houses and buildings were destroyed, along with cars, wagons, and even freight cars. It tore down electrical wires and spilled into cellars, smothering any people that were inside. I'm telling you, this is a new nightmare that I did not need. I mean, molasses is so much heavier than water, so when it hit the town, it hit with an intense amount of force. And unlike an ocean wave, it didn't move in one direction. Instead, when the tank exploded, it went in like every direction all at once. Oh no. Immediately, buildings were destroyed. Nothing had a chance. And you might be thinking, well, I would float on the surface. Nay. Instead of floating to the surface or like being able to swim to safety, people were pulled under into the thick, hot syrup. Once the initial impact had ended, there was molasses waist deep on the street. Horses and people both became trapped in this sticky substance, sinking further into it the more they struggled. It was kind of acting like quicksand. Yeah. So rescue workers are out there just quickly pulling everyone they could from the molasses. Local firefighters and police were helped by sailors from the USS Nantucket, which was like actually anchored at the nearby pier when the flood had happened. So they set up ladders across the molasses so rescuers could like climb above the spill and pull people out. Super smart, right? When Giuseppe came to, his wife and his daughter were with him. He's like, oh my God, thank God. But his son, Pasquale, he was still missing. Giuseppe then spent the rest of his afternoon attempting to get past police barricades so he could just look and search for his son. He eventually returned home after being turned away from every entrance. Across town, a firefighter named George Leahy had become trapped in the firehouse. He was stuck in an 18-inch crawl space where he struggled to keep his head above the molasses. Now, after he was trapped there for like 4 hours, and I was like, oh my God, was he saved? Tell me he was saved. He wasn't. He was trapped there for 4 hours and then later died. Hours later, just before dark, the rescue workers had found Pasquale. He had been thrown by the wave and crushed by a railroad car. He was killed instantly. Giuseppe was able to positively identify the remains of his son because of the red sweater the boy was wearing and still wearing. The rescue efforts lasted for 4 days. In the end, 21 people were killed in the Boston molasses flood. Pasquale's family was awarded $6,000, and George's family was given $7,000 for the pain and suffering he experienced before his death. I know. It's not funny, but I was like, he died, but he got $7,000. Well, his family did, but it's like, and like $6,000 for Pasquale's family. Like, thanks. Obviously, it's not enough, is what I'm saying. Well, the town, they needed answers. They were like, what the fuck, right? Everyone wanted to know, how in the hell did this happen? But just like with the humbug poisoning, the culprit wasn't one specific person. Instead, it was a long list of incompetence. They had realized that the man who supervised the construction of the tank had completely lacked the necessary training for the job. No other engineers or experts had been hired to oversee the building of the tank. And the man they had, he didn't even know how to read blueprints. He's like, no, that looks good. The owners of the Purity Distilling Company quickly looked to shift the blame away from themselves, as companies do. They started by trying to minimize the suffering of all the people who had died as the result of a spill. They had these doctors, come forward and testify during a trial and say that the people who were suffocated by molasses were killed so quickly they did not have a chance to suffer, which turns out is not true. I don't think any of us need to be a doctor to know that suffocating in molasses is not really an ideal way to go. But the company, they didn't stop there. They also tried to avoid blame for the death of Pasquale. Both he and another child, Maria DeStacio, had been collecting firewood near the tank when it exploded. Sadly, both of them had died, and the company claimed that since they were collecting firewood, they were technically trespassing. Yeah, they were trespassing on the company's property, so, boo. And if the two children were trespassers, company was not under any obligation to keep them safe, so their families should not receive any compensation for the death of their children. Yeah, they really thought they were onto something. They also claimed that the explosion had nothing to do with the piss-poor construction of the tank, and instead they blamed terrorists. Yeah, they basically said the tank was sabotaged, even mentioning a bomb threat against the tank. The trial proved that was as ridiculous as you think it is. I mean, yes, I guess there had been other bombings in Boston that year, because again, 1919 was a fucking crazy year. But are terrorists really circling the molasses tanks as a high-profile target? It didn't make sense. The court case, it went on for over 5 years, but thank God eventually, proving the company was at fault. Thank you, hold them accountable. Structural failure caused the explosion, and the company was forced to pay restitution, which would equal about $15 million today. This case established that companies can be held accountable for disasters like this. I'm rolling my eyes if you can't see me, because it's is it true? If you try and do that today, they always fucking get out of it, don't they? But I digress. New laws and regulations were introduced, meaning that a certified architect or engineer would be required to sign off on building plans. Whoa, what an idea. This began in Boston and eventually became a requirement across the United States. So yes, sweets can kill people in wild and unexpected ways, or at least they used to. The humbug poisoning took place in the 1850s, and the molasses spill was in 1919. Both led to laws changing to help protect people, right? And you're like, well, yeah, I mean, sadly, but finally, yeah, overdone. This should never happen again. And if it does, you kind of think it would be an old story. Pause your brain, because no, this is not just something that happened in the 1900s or 1880, whatever the hell the dates were. Because today, disasters involving sweets are still somehow destroying lives. And no, I'm not just talking about when they stopped making Butterfinger BBs, okay? Because what the fuck was that about? Whatever. But believe it or not, a company known for its iconic chocolate Easter bunnies has even taken part in the whole Killer Sweets saga. What are you telling me, Bailey? A big chocolate bunny killed people? Yeah, actually. Our final story comes to us from the great state of Pennsylvania. I always imagine there's a lot of murderers out there. I don't know. Now, I want to tell this one for a couple of reasons, because one, this actually took place, it happened in 2023. Huh? What? I don't remember hearing anything about it. Did you? Maybe. I don't know. I think it flew under the radar because it happened right around the same time as that horrible train disaster in Ohio. And also because it involves a big-time American candy company. So at the center of this story is the R.M. Palmer Company. Their logo is this cute little smiley bunny. Yeah, it's cute. And their company motto is making candy fun. Which, okay, all right, sure, I'll buy it, whatever. R.M. Palmer was founded in 1948 with just 4 employees and just 4 products. 3 of them were versions or different versions of chocolate bunnies. And right out the gate, this company hitched their wagon to the Easter holiday. R.M. Palmer began selling hollow chocolate Easter bunnies, and these things were flying off the shelves. I mean, it was an instant hit for Easter, right? It's that bunny you get when you're like, oh my God, a chocolate bunny, I can't wait to eat this. And then you bite into it and you're like, it's hollow? Really, Grandma? You're that cheap? This is the company that makes those bunnies. And they also make those mini chocolate Easter eggs wrapped in that thin tinfoil. that takes like 19 years to unwrap because it sticks to the chocolate, or sometimes you just eat the tin foil because you're like, fuck it. Well, whatever. They make that too. So when these came out, a popular chain of discount stores put in an order right away that would be worth around like $255,000 today, which is huge, which is with 4 employees, like hello, major. And after that, the company just really never looked back. Today, they have around 850 employees and they sell about 500 different products, making them one of America's largest candy companies. So you know they can afford rules and regulations. Okay, so listen. When did this happen, Bailey? When? Let me tell you. March 24th, 2023. We're in West Reading, Pennsylvania, which is about 60 miles north of Philadelphia. And this town is the home to the headquarters of the R.M. Palmer Company. Now, the company has 2 buildings involved in this story. There is the main corporate office building for the candy company, and right next door is like where the magic would happen, you know? That's where they would use like giant vats of chocolate to produce their sweet treats, including all the hollow chocolate they gave us. Anyway, so, okay, the time is 4:30 p.m. and there are about 35 office staff and 70 factory workers just grinding away at work between the 2 buildings. And then a funky stench starts hitting the nostrils of some of the employees at RM Palmer. They're like, you know, it's familiar. What is that? It's not a good sign, okay? The stench and the smell is making its way through both buildings 1 and 2. And it's an undeniable scent of rotten eggs. To the workers at RM Palmer, this was alarming. Natural gas doesn't really have a smell to it, which is why gas companies tend to add a sulfur scent to it, and that is for the purpose of people being able to know that there's like a gas leak happening. So it's supposed to smell like that, so you recognize it and know that there's a problem. Sulfur is that egg smell. I like it. I used to do a sulfur mask every night because I have like, you know, acne prone skin and it's really good for acne. So I kind of learned to really like that smell. No one needs to know that, but I'm just thought of it right now. So they're smelling eggs. Rotten eggs. The RM Palmer employees knew that if they smelled this, they needed to report it because there's a leak. So they do just that. One of the employees, named Patricia Borges, said that it was so strong that it was nauseating. She and some coworkers went up to their supervisor, told them about the suspected leak, and said it's probably best if everyone evacuates the building because they are smart human beings using their fucking brain. But allegedly, apparently, the supervisor said that he couldn't make that call, you know? His boss or someone higher up on the food chain would have to make the decision to evacuate, not him. So in the meantime, he's like, everyone just needs to go back to work until I get some answers. So 27 minutes go by and people are breathing in this bullshit. So the clock hits 4:57 p.m. And then, in a matter of nanoseconds, tragedy strikes. Building 2 explodes into 1 million pieces, like a bomb had gone off. The building was made of bricks, so heavy bricks were literally like, they flew up in the air and then were raining down in like a nearby community. Is a lot. The eruption was so large that it damaged the structure of Building 1. And it sent clouds of smoke hundreds of feet into the air and even shook houses nearby. And caught in the middle of all of this chaos was Patricia, the one who tried to, warn people. Just before the explosion, she was on a ladder cleaning a machine. Seconds after the explosion, Patricia was thrown on the ground and she heard screaming and chaos just everywhere. One of those screams came from a man named Mark Baxter, and he was in the factory's loading dock, dropping off a delivery of melted chocolate just before the explosion. He suffered hearing loss and 2nd and 3rd degree burns on about 20% of his body. Speaking of burns, that's exactly when Patricia saw that her own arm was on fire. When she saw herself burning alive, she asked God why he was giving her such a horrible death. But she didn't want to die in the fire, so she got up and tried to run out of the building. Dude, is wild because just then, as she's trying to make her way out of that building, the floor underneath Patricia caves in, collapse. Patricia said that she felt herself falling and just like it just felt never ending. And after she fell through the floor, she landed in a vat of liquid chocolate. And honestly, I mean, thank God she did, because like the chocolate, it had put out the fire on her body. And not only that, but the chocolate also like broke her fall. Unfortunately, a whole new set of more dire problems cropped up. Patricia broke her collarbone and both of her feet. So she was barely able to stand in that liquid chocolate that was up to her chest. So she's stuck in this chocolate. She just fell through some floors. Now she's stuck in the basement of this building. And she was down there for hours, screaming out for help as firefighters were outside like fighting the blaze, and there were helicopters like circling above the scene. She's just hoping somebody's gonna notice her. And then somehow things got worse. So Patricia's inside that chocolate vat. And as time is going on, it starts filling with water from the firefighters' hoses. Yeah. So she's like, oh shit. Like it's filling and filling and filling. And as the water reached her neckline, she realized she had better move or else she was going to drown. So she's able to get out of the vat and into a pool of water that was on the basement floor. She was able to hold on to some plastic tubing in order to keep herself above the water. And for the next 9 hours, Patricia waited and waited. She yelled, help, help, please help, like over and over and over again, but nobody was hearing her. Nobody was able to hear her. Now, after some time goes by, there's freezing cold water was now pouring into the basement, and Patricia's pain was only getting worse. But there must have been a guardian angel looking out for Patricia, because in the middle of the night, she sees a light and she starts screaming for help again. On the surface, some rescue dogs alerted the first responders that someone might be alive in the rubble. The rescuers had followed the sound of Patricia's screams, and after some digging, they were able to pull her out to safety. An emergency responder stated that when she emerged from the chaos, Patricia was banged up and experiencing hypothermia and was completely confused. Patricia's survival gave first responders some hope that there may be other survivors, so they would spend the next 2 days searching the rubble for any signs of life. Well, when all was said and done, the R.M. Palmer Candy Factory explosion killed 7 people, including Patricia's best friend, Judy. So in the weeks after this tragedy, a federal agency called the National Transportation Safety Board, aka the NTSB, well, they got involved and launched an investigation. If you're like me, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with transportation? Because I was like, what? The answer is nothing. But the NTSB also investigates accidents involving pipelines. Yeah, the more you know. In May of 2023, the NTSB issued their preliminary report, and girl, listen to what they revealed. Okay. They found that natural gas was leaking from 2 service lines in the building. More specifically, the leak was coming from something called a service T, which connects like multiple pipes together in a T-shaped formation. And guess who made this service T? DuPont, circling all the way back to our very first Dark History episode, DuPont. Of course they did. Are you freaking kidding me? Why are they always nearby when the worst shit happens, huh? They're gonna kill me one day at watch. Well, the investigation revealed that in 2021, a utility company did some necessary maintenance on the gas lines and the gas meter. But that DuPont service T, which was like installed all the way back in 1982, was still connected and pressurized at full capacity. In other words, it shouldn't have been. The NTSB released images of this DuPont service T in its report, and there is a giant fracture that is very clear on the pipe, and it shouldn't have been there, right? It's fractured. Now, to be fair, so DuPont doesn't kill me, the source of the explosion hasn't been identified yet. We'll see. In the final report from the NTSB will probably take a couple more years to finish, depending on how much DuPont wants to pay to make it, cover it up, but we'll see. So we don't know who really is at fault here. Maybe it was a chocolate bunny, I don't know. But here's what we know for sure. 7 workers died because RM Palmer didn't evacuate the building after employees reported there being a freaking gas leak. Because of that, Judy's family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit claiming that RM Palmer was negligent, as we've learned here, almost too many times at this point, that it seems to never be good when DuPont is involved. Even though that liquid chocolate maybe saved Patricia's life, she faces a very long road ahead to recovery. Her family even started a GoFundMe to assist with Patricia's mountain of medical bills and rehabilitation. Now here's the crappy part of all 3 of these stories. Now all of these companies make products that we love, right? And they create jobs for people in the community, but it doesn't seem like they're going about it the right way, huh? Well, yeah, I'm sure you're on board with that one. It takes me right back to the infrastructure episode and DuPont episode. Actually, every episode. It just seems like we just build stuff and then we don't really give a crap until it's too late. Like, hello, we need to update the pipes. And a lot of people like to complain that the government regulates too many businesses. Well, if companies stopped cutting corners, there wouldn't need to be a regulation. And are they really regulating? Because bad things still keep happening, huh? And here we are once again, literally this year. Like, what the fuck? It's just sad that there has to be such a sour truth behind these sweet disasters. I think the moral of the story is, accidents happen, but sometimes they're preventable accidents, aren't they? And maybe if these companies would stop being such shitheads and just fix their shit and handle things correctly. Oh my God, it probably could save so many lives, huh? I don't know. I don't know what the takeaway is other than companies fucking suck. Well, join me over on my YouTube where you can watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs. And then while you're there, you can also catch my murder, mystery, and makeup. I did that candy story, remember? So go check that out. I'll link it down below. I'd love to hear your guys' reactions to today's story. So over on social media, make sure to use the hashtag Dark History so I can find you and see what you're saying, all right? Now, let's read a couple of comments that you guys left me. Nancy Fotis says, quote, "Love Monday and Thursday uploads. Even my very country husband looks forward to your videos," end quote. Hot. Oh my God, Nancy, please tell your very country husband I said hello, but also hi to you, girl. Also, I would love to know, or maybe get a definition on what does very country mean? What's that? He listens to country music? Does he have a farm? Pigs? Animals? What's going on? I have questions. Let me know. Zav Nails left a comment on our Rasputin episode saying, quote, "We love your dad." I mentioned my dad. Aw, thank you, Zab. I love my dad too. He's pretty cool. Hey, Dad. He doesn't watch my videos. He does not understand what I do on the internet. He's like, hey, how's that internet thing going? Maybe I said that. I don't know, whatever. Hey, Dad. Never gonna say this, but everyone loves ya. Here's a comment I got from Ka Millie. Ka said, "Bailey, please do a dark history on capitalism." Hello, Ka. Why didn't I think about that? Hell yeah. Duh. That makes so much sense. Why haven't I done an episode on... Oh my God. You're brilliant, Ka. You're brilliant. I am excited to see what we uncover. I hope you have a good rest of your week. You make good choices. Please be safe out there. And I'll be seeing you guys later. Goodbye. Now, some of you might remember over on Murder, Mystery, and Makeup, a few years ago, I did an episode about Lucifer, the 32-foot tall horse statue with demonic red eyes that lives at the Denver airport. Do you remember? Flashback memory. Yeah, it's an old episode. Well, if you remember, in 2006, this sculpture, Lucifer, fell onto the creator, his name was Luis, and it ended up killing him. Well, Lucifer actually reminded me of another freak accident that no one saw coming. And this was a scandal that defined the 2000s. Maybe you can tell by my friends here. Oh my God, there's two of them. But maybe you remember, if you're listening on podcast, you can't see, but Joan is a lion. And we have Paul, who's dressed up as Siegfried, and Roy. Who is that though? They're so cute. Oh my God. Christmas card. Thank you. So it was a scandal that defined the 2000s. I have two words for you, Siegfried and Roy. So when you think of Las Vegas, you probably think oh my God, what shit show? Right? No, I'm just kidding. There's extravagance, hotels, buffets. There's so many buffets. Dancers, gambling, alcohol, cigarettes, your favorite singer doing a crazy show, and you're like, oh my God. And of course, well, there was a bunch of magicians. There aren't that many magic shows when you think about it today, huh? I don't know, magic for me personally, it kind of makes me uncomfortable, and I don't know why. They're just kind of creepy. They always make it so sexual. Disappearing is sexy. I mean, that's a way to turn it, I guess. If you ghost someone, just be like, well, I'm a magician. So back in the day, before technology, magic shows were all the rage. People loved them, and still do. I know they do, because one time, this is a side note, one time I made a comment about Chris Angel, because Chris Angel kind of low-key makes me I want to rip my skin off, and I don't know why, but But a lot of people think he's so hot and would bang. I don't know. You guys are wilds. It must be the rhinestone crosses and stuff. It just does it for you. Okay. Anyways, but listen, back then, magic shows, all the rage. And these shows really defined big cities, especially places like Vegas. At one point, Vegas was actually defined by a couple of world-famous magicians, Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn. So both of these men were originally from Germany, and they each had a very special connection to magic. Siegfried, it was said he had a tough childhood. His father struggled with alcoholism and depression. And I guess when Siegfried was only 5 years old, he performed a coin trick for his father, trying to cheer him up. Now, according to Siegfried, for the first time in his life, his father acknowledged him. And he started asking him questions about the coin trick, he was impressed, So this became a core memory for Siegfried. And for the rest of his life, it seemed like he was chasing that high or that acceptance, that interest, that reaction, Roy is going to be hard for me. Our words are always hard for me. Roy also, it was said, had a tough childhood. His father didn't seem to care about him at all, and I guess Roy just didn't fit in at school, and he didn't really do well in school, and he just wanted to get away from it all. So at a young age, Roy runs away from home and becomes a bellboy at sea. I know, I was like, what does that mean? Essentially, it's a boy who carries guests' luggage up to their room on a cruise ship. So there was one fateful night in 1959 on a German cruise ship. Siegfried and Roy finally meet. Siegfried was working in the first class section of the cruise ship, and Roy was a guest on the ship. And on certain nights, Siegfried was allowed to perform as his alter ego, Delmare the magician. Now, Siegfried was said to be very handsome and popular among the guests. I guess he had, well, if you look at pictures of him, he has this signature sharp, sculpted jawline, great bone structure. Great job. Wow. So he's just hot fire. And people are impressed by this hot cruise ship magician. That is, everyone except for one man, Roy. So Siegfried, I guess, is on stage, like, doing his act. And if you've ever been on stage, it's awkward, but you look out and sometimes you can see people when they're not paying attention to you, and it'll mess with your head. And you're like, why isn't that person paying attention to me? This happened recently because, like, I had to do I did like a panel, and I kept like seeing the people who were not paying attention. And I was like, dude, what the, hello? I'm up, like, hello, you know? And it was kind of like, I don't know, it starts to mess with you. Damn, you know, shit. Okay, anyways, so Siegfried is on stage and he sees Roy, who's just like not impressed. And Siegfried is like, dude, this guy's kind of driving me nuts. Like, hello, I'm doing magic. Aren't you impressed? You know? I think it may be at the end of the show or something. I'm not sure. But at one point, Siegfried actually goes up to Roy and is like, what's up? You didn't like that? Was that not good? You're too busy? What? I guess right away, Roy has some feedback for him. He's like, yeah, it wasn't that great. He essentially tells him, like, his magic tricks they're good, but, like, the act was boring. And it's like, damn, that hurts, but that's valid. Roy basically tells Siegfried, a rabbit is boring, been there, done that. Like, we don't care. Then he tells him, look, if you can make a rabbit disappear, could you do the same thing with a cheetah? Which honestly is, like, quite a jump, but okay. Siegfried is like, yeah, I guess. Okay. But then, this is when the story gets weird, and I question this origin story, but we'll go with it. Because Roy tells Siegfried to follow him to his room. Remember, they're on a cruise ship. Okay? Okay, so he follows him to his room. As soon as Siegfried gets to the door, Roy stops and, like, looks at Siegfried and is like, are you ready to meet Chico? And, like, okay, hot threesome, I don't know, like, this, okay, yeah. You know? He's like, show me Chico. What is Chico? I want to know. Well, then Roy swings open the door to his cruise ship room, and inside was a giant 100-pound cheetah named Chico. Yeah. Again, this is where I'm like, what? No one has any idea how Chico got on this ship. Why is Chico on this cruise? We don't know. I don't know. After Chico entered the picture, I guess this is like the rest is history, really. The captain, I guess, was upset, you know, that there was a cheetah on the ship. Yeah, I mean, isn't that like kind of like a danger to everybody? I don't know. Times were different, maybe? I don't know. But there wasn't much that they could do. They can't like throw the Chico overboard. Siegfried and Roy end up like coming up with a magic act together that they're going to perform. And they're like, let's use Chico instead of your dumb little bunny. Let's like use Chico to impress all these cruise ship people. So they end up putting on like their very first magic show together. And it was a hit. Like it ended with a standing ovation. And Siegfried knew in that moment that one, he just like, I don't know, met his partner for life and this cheetah, and he just knew he had struck gold. He just knew. On stage, Siegfried played this uptight blonde perfectionist engineer, while Roy was the wild black-haired animal whisperer. I guess he brought the spark to the show, and most importantly, he made the show stand out. How? I don't know. Right off the bat, these two worked really well together. I mean, there were like no secrets between them. They just became very, very close. Their manager said, quote, they literally communicate on stage with a glance. After their time on the ship ended, they took their show on the road, playing in clubs and theaters all across Europe. And their act was full of like classic tricks, like someone getting into a box, disappearing, and then showing up again. Whoa. So, like, yes, their show wasn't much different than the other magic shows out there, but Chico the cheetah elevated it to a whole new level. So Siegfried and Roy ended up selling out everywhere they went. All of their shows were sold out. Now, Roy was so good with Chico, it was like second nature to him. I still don't know why he had them in the first place. Well, this is what I heard. Apparently, Roy had worked at a zoo and he was like around animals all of his life. So he said that he had like training on how to handle these animals. But I still couldn't find out why he had it with him on a cruise ship. I still don't know. Roy, I guess, trusted his animals, and he never thought he would have anything to worry about. But at the end of the day, they're wild animals, and it was going to lead to a very, very unfortunate event. Siegfried and Roy's successful run in Europe caught the attention of an American talent agent. After a show, the agent approaches the pair and offers them a life-changing job in America. He tells them that there's this new hotel opening up called the Tropicana. The Tropicana was hosting this variety show, and they wanted Siegfried and Roy to join the act. And the best part, this new hotel was going to be in Las Vegas. Oh yeah, lights, bling, fashion, feathers, fire. I don't know, cool. Well, Siegfried and Roy knew this was a huge opportunity, so they agreed. They were like, okay, let's do it. And in 1967, they traveled to America for the very first time. Now, at this time, it's a big gamble because before this point, most Vegas shows were old school singers or dance shows. So magic and tigers, I don't know. America was a little different from Europe. There were almost no big magic shows, let alone ones with animals. So no one was sure how audiences would react. In the show, Siegfried and Roy, they're part of a really long lineup. They were the 14th act in this, again, big show. So not the stars. But it was pretty clear from the start that the audience really loved them. They loved their act, and they loved Chico. They loved this whole live animal situation. It was wild. So the two keep doing their show, and throughout the 1970s, they developed their show into something even more and more spectacular. They even come up with their own catchphrase, Sarmoti. It stands for Siegfried and Roy, Masters of the Impossible. It was kind of like their abracadabra. They'd be like, Sarmoti, or Marto. I already forget what the catchphrase is, but it becomes very, very popular. They even recorded an entire album with music from their show. Honestly, I listened to the album the other day, and it's a vibe. You want to be in a bedroom that is 80s themed with a dry martini, cigarette, glass tables, lion rugs. You just gotta listen to it. You gotta listen to it. It's something. Maybe your hair's wrapped up in a towel because you just got out of your pool, and you got some pink lipstick on and some cute glasses, and you're smoking a cigarette inside while you're vacuuming. It's the vibe it's giving. I liked it. Anywho, by the 1980s, the two of them aren't just part of an act. They were now headliners. They moved to a new hotel, and they get their very own show called Beyond Belief. Yeah. And by this point, they're really the talk of the town. If you go to Vegas and you don't get a ticket to see Siegfried and Roy, what was the point of going? Honestly, that's why you went to Vegas, really. I mean, there are big names that saw their show. Sylvester Stallone, Dolly Parton, Robin Williams, Barbara Streisand. I'm having a stroke. What? They all came to see them. Even Michael Jackson was a really big fan. He wrote a song called Mind is the Magic, and he let the guys use it. That was their song for them. Don't talk to me. You've done nothing for me, Joan. Well, you're a lion, so you can't really write me a song. You two, back there. Make some magic, goddammit. One of you disappear. Okay, great. Wow. By 1983, Chico had to retire. Now, Chico was just Roy's pet. And so Roy began adopting more tigers and cheetahs. He even adopted some extremely rare white tigers from India. I know. We watched Tiger King. We know it's not okay, but this is the story, okay? Then he allegedly started his own tiger farm. Yeah, I'm sorry. He wanted to breed his own white tigers. In their minds, I don't know if it was Siegfried and Roy or just Roy, but they really wanted people to associate white tigers with their act specifically. They were all about that branding. Many of his white tigers were products of inbreeding because that's pretty much really the only option when breeding in captivity. Not sure what that looks like for the tigers, but, not great. Plus, it's so hot in Vegas. Like, my God, those poor tigers. Are they used to warm climates? I don't know. I don't know anything about tigers, really. I just know they don't belong on a stage and stuff. Yeah. In 1986, the show moved to a new theater on the Strip, the Mirage. Around this time, the show would have almost 800,000 audience members per year. And the seats, they would sell for around $100 each. Do the math. Beep, bop, boop, bop, boop, boop. I don't know. I'm not good at math. But the hotel's profits grew by nearly $40 million each year just because of their show. Icons, legends. Wow. They changed the game. We can hate on it all day because, they played with live animals and whatnot. But, I think they kind of made Vegas interesting. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anywho, the show kept on growing. Soon around 250 people worked on stage and behind the scenes. And there were even a couple of assistants who helped with the magic tricks. Wow. And I guess there were some professional animal wranglers on staff, but they never came on stage because the audience was supposed to believe that Siegfried and Roy had everything under control. Don't freak out. But honestly, that was far from the truth. Roy kept collecting animals. He just couldn't help himself. He loved them. He got more animals, so he got swans, goats, horses, a python, alpacas, and even a turkey. Yes, a turkey. The turkey's name was Merlin, so makes sense. These actually weren't just for the show, they were his pets also. Roy's pets. Now, apparently, allegedly, I don't know, but this drove Siegfried nuts. He only saw the cats and animals as part of the show, and he really didn't care about them off stage. He only cared about the show. And that's fair. As the show got bigger, so did Siegfried and Roy's egos. I don't blame them. Have you seen the outfits? The hair, the jawline, the animals. It was sex. It really was. So their egos are just, woo, And on top of that, I guess they were both pretty hot-headed and they could set each other off at the drop of a hat. Plus, they'd always bring their personal problems into work, so things were just always tense. And animals are sensitive around those things. Cover your ears. They're very sensitive. They can read when you're upset. But Roy in particular, it was said that he could be a very angry man. He would shout at anyone instead of talking. One employee said, quote, "It was a lot safer for me to be in a small space with a cheetah or a tiger than with Siegfried or Roy," end quote. Well, I believe it, honestly. The only way to get to the top is by screaming, really. Apparently, the only time Roy wasn't shouting was when he was talking to the tigers. Aw. Now, there was a moment in the show where Roy pretended to be transformed into a tiger. He would get into the cage, and then the cage would go behind a curtain. And then when he pulled the curtain, it'd be a tiger instead of a human. And then Siegfried would come on stage and act surprised to find a tiger. He's like, "What? That's crazy." And then the tiger, this was part of the bit, the tiger would almost bite him, but would just miss. And the audience would be like, "Oh." It was a classic no-fail trick. As long as Siegfried moved fast enough, it always worked out. But there was one night when Siegfried, he had moved a little too slow. And the tiger actually bit his arm. He was rushed off stage and he went to the doctor and he ended up getting a dozen or dozens of stitches, but luckily doesn't lose his arm. And while the show was clearly starting, it felt like it was starting to get kind of out of control, it was definitely downplayed by Siegfried and Roy. They would even play into accidents. If an accident did happen on stage, they would be like, "See? What we do is very dangerous and only we can do it." But honestly, I don't blame them for doing that because that's just putting on a good show. You go with it, right? You make it seem like that was planned. Because if you freak out, then everyone's going to freak out. So I get why they did that. But they really just wanted people to believe that they were masters of the impossible. I don't know. Siegfried and Roy, they continued to dominate Vegas all the way into the 2000s. There was even an animated TV show called Father of the Pride about the tigers that were part of their performance. Do you remember this show? I had a vague memory of this, and I feel like maybe I'm making it up, but I'm pretty sure I remember it. Good for them. It's kind of hard to understand just how famous these two and their tigers were. Icons, I'm telling you, icons. But then, all that changed one night. I love these two. They look so good. You guys look so good. I think you should dress like this all the time. And Paul, whoever your friend is, I don't know, we just met. What's his name? Robert? Oh, that's cute. You guys are very cute together. Again, I wish I was part of this costume idea. You guys always come up with the cutest costumes, and I just get left out. I mean, what could I be? I could have been the turkey. If you would just include me, I could be part of the show. It's not fair. You guys get all the cuteness. Just loving this. Can't get over it. Okay, back to the show, huh? October 3rd, 2003. The house was packed. Everyone's excited to see Siegfried and Roy's show that evening. They get to a section called the rapport. This part of the show is very low-key. It's supposed to be a moment where everyone in the audience gets to relax for a few minutes, reset, and get ready for their next big trick. Now, during this time, Roy brings out a tiger named Manticore. Oh yeah, Manticore. He would tell the audience to give Manticore a big round of applause. And he would tell the audience every single night, he was like, it's Manticore's very first show. Everyone, applause. And the audience was like, oh my God, it's Manticore's first show. Ah! And they're going crazy. It wasn't his first show. It was his first show every single night. You know? It was like his 2000th show. But who cares? Anything to put on a good show. Manticore. So Roy and the tiger, they go on stage together. They sit down and Roy would just talk to the tiger. He'd ask questions and hold the microphone to its mouth. He'd be like, how's your day, Manticore? Wow. And then Manticore would actually growl or meow into the microphone. And, as an audience member, you're like, oh my God, living. How's it going, Manticore? Manticore, tell us, what's your favorite color? Manticore, who is your celebrity crush right now? Then Roy gets up and the tiger also gets up and puts his paws on Roy's shoulder. They're slow dancing. Yeah. And they're slow dancing, kind of swaying around the stage. They're swaying around, I guess you can say, and then they leave the stage. And that's the whole bit. It's supposed to be sweet, simple, and I guess the audience just really loved this part because it was just tiger love with its owner. It was a moment for the animal to show their personality, I guess. Okay, but this night, the show gets to the rapport. But right from the very first moment, behind the scenes, something was off. The animal handlers bring Manticore to the stage and they notice he's acting a bit different. Manticore seems moody, they said. I'm sure realistically, he's agitated, right? Doing these performances night after night. He's like, I'm a goddamn tiger, for Christ's sakes. But he's moodier this night. And as soon as Manticore is on stage, he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, He's not standing or walking where he needs to go. He's not hitting his marks. And on top of that, Roy, he was a little off too. It was just his 59th birthday, and the night before, went out. We don't know what he did, but he was a little tired. He was a little off. Now, Roy even says out loud into the microphone, asking Manticore, what's wrong? What's wrong? And the whole auditorium can hear. And everyone is dead silent. And it's clear to everyone in the audience that like something isn't right. They just, you're like, something's not right here. I don't like this. Then Roy tries to get the tiger into the correct spot, but Manticore isn't cooperating. So Roy then tries to like push Manticore's body, like you do with your cat or your dog when they're like on your bed and they're like right on your feet funny, or they're taking up all the bed. So then you try and shove them and they're playing they're just being dead weight. And you're like, come on, like that. He's doing that. They like to do that. Anyway, so he shoves him into the correct spot. He's like, come on. But imagine, like, this is a huge-ass tiger. It's not like your dog or your cat, okay? Big tiger. Then Manticore suddenly starts to come to life, but, like, not in a good way. He kind of turns more like into an animal, you could say. He first turns to Roy. Then he looks down at Roy's hand and tries to bite it. But Roy moves his hand quickly so he doesn't get bit. But, it's kind of like, oh shit. And then the animal handlers backstage are like looking at each other and wondering like, should we do something? Like, this is kind of weird. Should we go out there? So one of the handlers goes on stage and tries to get, the cat's attention. It's like, look at me. I guess he had like a piece of meat and he's like, hey, meat. But Manticore does not take his eyes off of Roy for a second. Like, he is locked in. They're like, hey, over here, like trying anything. So Roy tries to reassert dominance. And I guess he bops the tiger with the microphone just right on the nose. I'm sure that's going to do it for him, huh? Oh, look, like this. Live reenactment. Boop. And you think that's going to get a good response? Okay. So he looks the tiger right in the eyes and says out loud, he boops, boop, and then says, no. And that was it. That was it. Manticore knocks Roy off his feet with his paws, then lunges at his body. Again, live, on stage. People are like, oh shit. Manticore was over 400 pounds. So once he's on you, good luck. Good luck. Manticore goes straight for Roy's neck. Blood starts going everywhere, just gushing. It's... Oh, man. Are you going to attack me? Oh, my God. Did I boop your eye off? Oh, my God, Joan, I think I booped your eye off. I booped Joan's eye off. That's okay. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, sorry. I didn't boop her eye off. Okay. Manticore has Roy by the neck, so he can, like, barely scream, I was like, damn, what a show. Could you imagine being in the audience? You're like, damn, okay, like, this is it. Oh, shit, we're going to watch someone die on the stage? Like, what do you do? I don't know. But once he does manage to scream, which he does, the sound gets picked up by the microphone and it's just amplified throughout the stage. The audience is horrified. Everyone is screaming. Ah! It's a lot. It's a lot. Now, I don't know if some audience people are getting up and leaving at this point. I would assume people are probably starting to move. But I that's just what I'm imagining. I'm not sure. I'm sure though. But Manticore then, has Roy by the neck, starts dragging Roy's body off the stage. And it looked like Roy was like a rag doll. And as soon as the tiger gets off stage, everyone backstage is now, trying to hit Manticore or bribe him with food, anything, because he would not let Roy go. Okay. Someone on the staff was brave enough to grab Manticore's tail, which at least stopped him from walking away with Roy, but still, he would not let go. Finally, it's not funny, it's just they had these animal wranglers or these professional animal people, and the best they could come up with was grabbing a fire extinguisher and spraying it at Manticore so he would let go of Roy's body. Yeah, the professionalism of it all, huh? So he lets go because of the fire extinguisher. So if an animal's attacking you, just grab a fire extinguisher, I guess. And the handlers are able to get Manticore into his cage. I know. I thought like they would have some kind of protocol in place for situations like this because, again, this is a professional place with a lot of money involved, and it's Vegas and it's a show. You just think they would protocol, but a fire extinguisher. Okay, whatever. Anywho, so Roy rushed to the hospital. The audience, they're still there. Some of them are. They don't even know what to do. Everyone is in shock, okay? They're like, do we get a refund? Apparently people just start praying. Others are crying. There are people just wandering through the casino like, I don't know what I just witnessed. I mean, it would fuck them up, right? At the hospital, the doctors are rushing to save Roy's life. I guess his heart stops 3 separate times and he's bleeding out everywhere. I mean, Roy can't breathe because of the damage to his neck. And at this point, everyone's assuming, Roy isn't gonna make it. There's no way, But miraculously, Roy pulls through. Close call. Now, he stayed hospitalized for months, and besides his horrific injuries, he was said to have suffered severe brain damage. Now, I don't know if you remember this. I remember when this was in the news and stuff, and it was like a really big deal. It was like, oh my God, is he gonna be okay? I thought he died. He didn't die. I was misinformed. But of course, after this, like future shows immediately canceled. And then almost every single one of the 250 employees had to find new jobs. And then the giant theater stayed empty for a while. It's like a ghost theater, So the media is reporting on this. And then this part had me a little confused. I was surprised. I was like, what? Because the government released a 233-page report about the incident. And I was like, why? Well, I guess they were concerned that this attack was a sign that the animals were being mishandled. So they did the whole investigation into it. And the results showed that Siegfried and Roy, their show, had failed to protect the audience because there was no barrier separating the animals from the crowd. I'm kind of laughing because what about the animals? Maybe they shouldn't be there on stage, but okay, it's okay. People refused to believe that the tiger would turn on Roy after all of Roy's experience, There were conspiracy theories flying around saying that the attack was due to foul play. Others were saying, that Manticore had been distracted by an audience member. Probably an audience member that wasn't paying attention. But in the end, none of that was proven to be true. At home, Siegfried had to help his lifelong partner learn how to walk, talk, and even eat food again. I mean, their lives were completely changed just in an instant. And, throughout his healing journey and throughout the years, Roy always defended Manticore after he attacked him. He said that Manticore actually saved his life. This is according to Roy. Roy said that he had a stroke on stage. Doctors believed it's after Manticore attacked him, but Roy said it was before Manticore attacked him. And Manticore just wanted to drag him off stage to safety. I can get behind that because, again, animals are very intuitive. And maybe he was not doing well and just trying to protect him. I don't know. From that moment on, they never really appeared in public. Apparently, they gave one last magic performance a few years later for charity. It was a very small show in comparison to their Vegas days. But the two of them just stayed in Vegas with their animals for the rest of their lives. Sadly, in 2020, Roy caught COVID and died. And then later that year, Siegfried discovered too late that he had cancer. Aw, I know. In 2021, he died in a matter of months, just less than a year after Roy. Siegfried and Roy are iconic, but you just can't get around the fact that this horrible accident never would have happened to Roy if he hadn't started training and breeding tigers to begin with. Magic shows still today are pretty popular. I know, I'm really hesitating to say that because I'm really, Bailey, are they? Yeah, I mean, when you look it up, Vegas has over like 14 headliners for magic shows alone. No animals, but still 14 headliners for magic shows. Magicians. There you go. That's the word. So I don't think magic's going anywhere, but I definitely think using animals, I think we're more aware now as time has gone on that, you know, we shouldn't be doing that shit, huh? Yeah. I don't know though. If it's a turkey, is that okay? Because like they're smaller, you know? I can understand the tigers because like, no, don't do that. But like the turkey, like what if the turkey is like in the cage and then like you do the little like disappeared, you know? Would you feel bad then? Let me know down below. I'm not saying they should do it. I'm just wondering, like, is it case by case with animals? When it comes to some people, they care more about like the flashiness of their creations than the actual safety of them. I mean, high risk, high reward. It makes sense. So maybe the lesson with today's story is to never let consequences get in the way of a good idea. Yeah, right? Well, I don't know. Today's tricky. Sometimes you have a good idea, and then you do it, and then it turns out that was a bad idea. And welcome to life, baby, huh? Yeah, you live, you learn, and that's it. That's the takeaway. Or sometimes the thing kills you, like the Lucifer situation, or the autopilot guy. I don't know, but at least they try to invent something. And autopilot's pretty sick, you know? I'll give them that one. The Vegas thing, I think we can do without all the animals. I'm still thinking like turkeys are okay. I'm okay with that. I'm gonna have people upset with me like, Brie, that's really fucked up. But, you know, I'd rather someone put it... I just feel like magicians still use bunnies, don't they? Isn't that kind of mean? Okay, let me not get off track here. What I'm saying is, that's life. Cue Frank Sinatra, that's life. I wish we could. That's life, you know. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with me today. Did you know you can actually join me over on my YouTube where you can watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs, and you can see what my co-hosts dress as, because they always come in cute costumes. Oh, and while you're there, you can also catch my murder mystery and makeup. That's right. And you can subscribe because I'm here for you all the time. I'm here weekly, all the time. Always got something to say. Now let's read a couple of comments that you guys have left me. Yeah? Issy8679 left me a comment saying, "You've been my comfort person for so many years now. I fall asleep to your vids, watching them while I'm cleaning, getting ready, walking around. You're awesome." Issy, that is so sweet. Thank you so much. Yeah, that really means a lot because I've said this before and I'll say it again. Like a lot of the times I'm just sitting here in a room and like talking to a camera. And I'm like, is anyone like watching or listening? Like, is anyone, you know? I don't know. And also, I kind of like that people fall asleep to my videos. Like, I'm glad that I can bring some kind of comfort, soothingness, I guess. Like, safe. I make you feel safe enough to fall asleep. And that means a lot. That's really nice. I fall asleep to Judge Judy a lot. I love Judge Judy. I'm stuttering. I need to freaking go home. Anyways, thank you for the love. It really means a lot. I hope you keep hanging out. I appreciate you. Thank you. DN2328. Sorry if I said your name wrong. I'm trying to figure it out. I really am. I feel so sad Paul had died again, but to see him at the window made me spit my wine out. Yeah, we did. We had a little funeral for Paul, but you know, Paul's like, he's dead, but is he? You know, Paul actually lived a lot of people's fantasies. He showed up to his own funeral to see who was crying and who wasn't. I don't blame him. You know? Good for him. And now he found a partner in the afterlife. I'm really happy for him. He's really thriving. Yeah, he's doing great. I'm glad he can make you giggle a little bit. I love that. Princess Jania 9037 left me an episode suggestion. I love you and your work. You should look into doing the dark history of casinos. I feel like that would be very interesting. Princess, you're onto something here. I've been looking into this and I've been kind of like Googling and goggling some things. And yeah, I think we're gonna do an episode on Vegas. I think so. Do you think that's okay? That's kind of the same thing, right? Gambling, money, booze, what else? Feather hats, Stay on the lookout. Thank you for the suggestion. I'm always looking for dark history or murder mystery suggestions, so keep them coming. I love you guys for watching and engaging. If you didn't know, Dark History is an Audio Boom original. And I'm your host, Bailey Sarian. Hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll be talking to you soon. Goodbye. Now, today's story is kind of fun because we all love a mystery. Do we? I don't know, but I like a mystery. And there are mysteries lurking on Earth that literally no one will ever solve, right? Now, it doesn't matter if you're in the military or a scientist or a researcher, the ocean scares like millions of people, right? A lot of people have a fear of the ocean. So much so that there's actually a word for it. It's called thalassophobia. Thalassophobia is called thalassophobia. Nailed it. Fear of the sea. So, hey, it's a valid phobia. You're allowed to be afraid of it. I mean, after all, did you know that like experts say that more than 80% of the ocean has never been explored, never seen, never touched by humans? There are even parts of the ocean that light can't penetrate. So who the hell knows what could be hiding deep down in those blue waters? Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, my lights are out back here. I just turned them on. You're welcome. So back to the story. Human bodies, ships, airplanes. Maybe there's like a whole island utopia out there. I mean, we don't know. And many believe where there's darkness, there is terror and mystery. So tonight, maybe, we're all gonna go sleep with the fishes. Sometimes it feels like no one is safe if water is involved, right? I mean, it's a substance we need to live, but who knew that sometimes it's guided by a demonic presence, reaching its murky claws out of the waters to claim another soul. Ooh, this is spooky. The first mystery we're gonna talk about is very creepy. It's a ghost ship. Spooky sound effect. I know. Have you ever heard of a ghost ship? Well, it's the name of a ship that's been found usually under like mysterious circumstances, just slowly floating around the waters with no living people on board. Some ghost ships are just, ghost stories or stories from like the Pirates of the Caribbean. The Black Pearl. Honestly, no, I don't, because I've never seen the Pirates of the Caribbean, but I've been on the ride, so I kind of get it, right? Anyways, what I'm actually getting at is there's a really famous ship that had some very mysterious circumstances around it. And that is the Mary Celeste. Doo, 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 doo. I know. This is a mystery that even experts who've studied the case for years and years, they can't seem to figure it out. And boy, does it give you the heebie-jeebies. So this story, it starts with a man named Captain Benjamin Briggs. Now, by 1872, Captain Briggs had been a captain for like a long time, okay? He was tired. The sea life is very rough, and he's ready to just turn in his captain's hat and just work as a businessman like all his other friends. He got married, he was a father, he's turning into a family man. He's just ready to settle down and start this new chapter of his life. But when he saw this really beautiful ship named the Mary Celeste, it was up for sale. Oh man, he was like, it's speaking to me. I cannot resist. I need to get this ship. I mean, it was beautiful. It was like the 1800s version of a freaking yacht. Mary Celeste was originally built in 1861, but had just had a $10,000 renovation, which today is like spending over $300,000 on a renovation. So it was nice. It was real nice. It was a massive 100-foot long ship made of solid cedar wood and weighed like 282 tons. Which, like, side note, how do you even build a ship that big? And how do you get it into the water? I don't get it. Do you build a ship directly in the water? Do you scoot it in? I got a lot of questions. Let's ask Noah. He had a big ship and animals. It was a big ass ship. And this ship was something called a merchant ship. And this is a ship that would take anything you needed to buy, sell, or trade locally or internationally. So getting this was a good business opportunity for the seasoned seaman, Captain Briggs. It's like good money. He was hired by a wine merchant to bring 1,700 barrels of alcohol to Genoa, Italy on the Mary Celeste. I guess the wine merchant needed extra barrels of alcohol to make his wine stronger, which good for him. Great. So with the wine barrels on board, Captain Briggs and his crew make a pit stop in New York City to pick up his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Captain Briggs wanted to bring his family along for the journey. This was just supposed to be a very, laid back, easy business trip that could double as a cute little vacation for the family. So on a rainy morning in November of 1872, Captain Briggs and his family, as well as 7 crew members, button up their coats and excitedly board the Mary Celeste. On the ship was Briggs' first mate, Albert, second crewmate, Andrew, Edward, the ship steward or manager, and 4 German seamen, Arian, Gottlieb, and 2 brothers named Volkert and Boz. So Briggs himself actually chose his team, and they all had great reputations and were described as peaceable and first-class sailors. So like we've said before, this wasn't Briggs' first rodeo. He knew the ocean and he knew how to handle a ship. And also he had a great track record. I mean, he had led many successful voyages. And unlike many other captains at the time, he wasn't a drunk. I mean, that was rare. That's not like me being shady. That was rare. In fact, Briggs was something called a teetotaler. And this was like an old-timey way of saying that he was straight edge. Like they don't drink, they don't do drugs or anything. I was going to make like a straight edge joke, but honestly, good for them. They're doing the Lord's work out there, keeping their bodies pure. Let them have that. What I'm getting at is that Briggs wasn't dipping into any of the booze that he was taking to Italy, but someone would. The journey to Genoa should have only taken like a few weeks, but I guess the weather turned out to be pretty rough. I mean, they were sailing at the end of November, so basically winter, not exactly the ideal time to be sailing around the world, but it's all right. Here we are. A few days into the journey, something much worse seemed to have happened to Mary Celeste. Okay, so picture this. It's December 5th. A British captain named Morehouse is sailing his ship through Portugal. It's a different ship, okay? Now it's a chilly, foggy day, okay? He decides to go above the deck and check out the seas real quick. He looks to the ocean, and in the distance, he sees something moving. He's like, what's that? What is that? The fog, it clears. He's like, oh, it's a ship. Great. And it's not just any ship. He actually recognizes it. He's like, hey, I know that ship. That's the Mary Celeste. He continues to watch the ship, and he can tell that the movements seem to be all over the place, like the captain is drunk or maybe something's off. So he calls to his men to come and look at the ship, and they're just as confused. Why would it be moving like that in the ocean? And as the ship gets closer, they notice their sails are all messed up. They're all in the wrong direction. Some of them are even missing. The ship floats closer to them, and now all of Morehouse's crew are jumping up and down, sending signals to Mary Celeste like, hey, are you guys okay over there? You good, man? You good, bro? Asking if they need any help, but they're not getting any type of response from the Mary Celeste. And that's when they start kind of maybe putting pieces together, and they're like, oh, I think something might be off here. The captain realizes that the Mary Celeste left New York 8 days before their ship, and it shouldn't even be in the middle of Portugal. And why are there ropes hanging off the side of the ship? That's when the crew looks at each other and realizes something is very, very wrong. Now, Captain Morehouse decides to send a few of his crew over to investigate the situation. So 2 seamen hop in a raft and paddle on over to the Mary Celeste. They climb aboard and they look around and realize that no one's there. No one's manning the wheel. No one's steering. The whole ship was completely empty. There was no sign of a captain, no sign of the captain's wife, the crew, the 2-year-old Sophia. What in the world was going on? Aliens. That's what everyone thinks. I know. Aliens, always. If it ain't aliens, it's women. Welcome to dark history. Right away, they notice that the 2 of the hatches, those trap doors that lead down to the rest of the ship, well, they were left open. Now, this isn't a great sign, but they are there to help. So they make their way below the deck. Maybe they're down there and, right? I mean, anything could be there. Blood, bodies, the Kraken, Jaws. Well, it's weirder than any of that because at least they'd have some answers. But all they find is a few feet of water, which I guess isn't a bad thing for a ship this big, but there are no bodies and no other clues as to what happened. In Captain Briggs' room, they find a sword stashed under his bed and the ship's log, but the last entry was made on November 25th, 9 whole days before. And this entry didn't say anything about like a storm or cause any type of alarm. Briggs had noted their location, which was 400 nautical miles away from where they were now. Nothing is adding up and nothing's making sense. The seamen realize that the Mary Celeste's lifeboat is missing. So, okay, maybe there was a storm and they took the lifeboat. But if there was a storm that scared the crew into leaving, why hadn't they taken any food with them? And why hadn't they mentioned it in the ship's log? So the whole thing, too many questions, So there are actually a few theories out there as to what happened to the Mary Celeste. One of them was the thought that maybe a storm rolled in, forcing the ship completely off course. And if that happened, the captain probably told his crew to abandon ship. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, again, there was nothing physically wrong with the Mary Celeste, which most likely would have happened during a crazy storm. There's another theory out there that some people think some sort of giant sea monster must have jumped out of the ocean and swallowed everyone whole, which sounds fun. But, there were a lot of myths about like the sea monsters back then. And with no evidence about where the Mary Celeste passengers went, people were like, yeah, it's gotta be sea monsters then. Many can't get on board with that one because the ship would have been destroyed in some kind of way if a big sea monster jumped up and like ate everyone on the ship. But I'm not saying it's not possible, right? There's another interesting theory, which are pirates. I know what you're thinking, like, really, pirates? Come on. But it's actually not a stupid theory, because back then pirates were a very much real threat, especially if they came across a merchant ship. The pirates, they could shoot at you, jump on board, rob you, kill the captain, take over. And that was actually what Captain Morehouse, who found the Mary Celeste, said. He believed that pirates did it. And that one kind of seems to make sense, but let me further explain, because here's my theory. You ready? It's a good one. I solved it. Thank you. You're welcome. The sailors that found the Mary Celeste were the pirates. A theory, not a fact. Theory. Plot twist, right? Bet you did not see that one coming, but hear me out. First of all, there was no signs of violence, right? Pirates, pretty violent. Can't be pirates. They would have they would have stole everything, and everything was still on the ship. Second, the Mary Celeste was found in great condition, no leaks, no major issues. And again, the captain was great about filling out the ship's log, updating it all the time like he was supposed to. And then suddenly it just stopped. The food was left on board along with everyone's personal stuff like jewelry. And here's the even crazier part. The day before the Mary Celeste set sail, Captain Briggs had dinner with the other captain, Captain Morehouse. Coincidence? I think not. Now, I'm not going to say Captain Morehouse and his sailors murdered everyone on the Mary Celeste, but hey, anything's possible if you just believe, But to me, it sounds like Morehouse and his crew boarded the Mary Celeste, maybe forced everyone into like the lifeboat, told them to go suck a dick and fuck off and like go into the ocean. And they took the ship to cash in on like the sweet reward if they turned in that ghost ship. Because when Captain Morehouse found the ship, that's exactly what he and his crew did. They brought the Mary Celeste to a port city nearby, and while there, the British authorities questioned Captain Morehouse and were like, oh, you just found this super valuable ship out in the ocean? That's a little suspicious. It's kind of like someone saying they just found a Ferrari on the side of the road with the keys in the ignition and now they want to sell it. Would you buy it or would you have some questions? I'd be like, how much? There's always a price. Another interesting piece of information, remember the booze that Captain Briggs was transporting to Italy? Well, by the time Morehouse turned the ship in, 9 of those booze barrels were empty. And like I mentioned earlier, Captain Briggs, he was straight edge. And since he was in charge, it was very likely his crew wasn't drinking either. So that leaves his wife and 2-year-old, which I'm gonna just go ahead and say they probably weren't drinking either. But I don't know. So plenty of reasons for the British authorities to be a little suspicious, right? But they end up giving Morehouse and his crew a modest little consolation prize for hauling the ship to shore. It was a very valuable ship, and the booze especially was still worth like a pretty penny. On board was about $30,000 worth of alcohol barrels. And today that would be like $800,000. Would you push some people overboard for that amount? I'm laughing because I think some of us would. And maybe that's exactly what happened. You just never know. All we know for sure is that the ocean seems like the perfect place to, I don't know, get rid of 10 people and their bodies. I'm not suggesting anything like for you to do, but back then maybe. Listen, the ocean is a very big, large place. It's a body of water, right? So it makes sense like some people would go missing over the years. But what if I told you whole civilizations have disappeared into the ocean? Like, sucked in, gone. And one of the most famous of these lost civilizations, Atlantis. Now that we've touched a little bit on a ghost ship, let's talk about a ghost town. And one of my favorites, and a lot of people's favorites, Atlantis. And no, not that fun Disney movie that still holds up. I'm talking about a real city that was written about our good friend, Greek philosopher Plato. He's not my good friend. I don't know him. I'm just kidding. Plato wrote lots of books in his time, and in one of them, he talks about a perfect civilization, something he called a utopia made up of half gods, half humans. Now, I'm imagining a whole society of hotties. No, I'm not. Anyway, the utopia he was writing about was called Atlantis. Atlantis was a huge island in the Mediterranean, almost 1 million square miles, which is like 6 Californias, okay? It was huge. Like you would have to try really hard to miss that thing. The Atlantis Empire was actually made up of a bunch of smaller islands with little canals and moats between. Think of Venice, which, irony, is also a sinking city. Anyways, the Atlantis Islands were lush, green, and beautiful, full of exotic animals. And the thing that really sets Atlantis apart was how advanced it was. I mean, for starters, they had running water, which is huge, not really a thing back then. But not just that, they had hot and cold running water. Groundbreaking. Now, this place, Atlantis, even had a racetrack for horses that circled the entire island. And because of their strong naval base and godlike warriors, Atlantis basically dominated the lands around them in the Mediterranean. Most Atlanteans, besides being ripped and godly, were also famously good people. They were pure of heart, super moral, just absolute angels living in paradise. But nothing good lasts forever, they say. The Atlanteans got comfortable, they even got greedy, and these good people became morally bankrupt. The legend goes that Zeus... Oh, are you Zeus? No, Zeus didn't have a Triton, did he? Oh, you're Poseidon! Okay, I thought you were Ariel's dad. The legend goes that Zeus, who was basically the big daddy Greek god, he sees this and he's like, no, you guys, you're having too much fun, you're not being good people. You had to let all this go to your head. Now you have to pay the price. So Zeus curses the land. He brings in huge earthquakes, raging firestorms, complete and utter destruction. Could you imagine? Minding your own business and fireballs start flowing at your face and like the heavens are falling from up above, buildings are collapsing and just crushing crowds of people. And the whole time the ground is splitting below their feet. The ocean around them starts rising higher and higher, just swallowing people along with it. And you only have a few minutes before seeing nothing but water all around you. Ocean swallowed Atlantis right up, never to be seen again. And that's why they call it the lost city of Atlantis. Whole civilization, poof, gone, never heard from again. I know what you're thinking, Bailey, this sounds so fake. Zeus, an angry ocean swallowing up people? There's no way that's real. Well, shut up, okay? But let me tell you something. Plato, the guy who wrote about Atlantis in the first place, you see, he loved combining fact and fiction in his writing. I mean, he was a pretty poetic guy. This Plato guy was huge in the study of philosophy. And so if everything else he did is studied today as fact, why is this singled out as complete fiction? Maybe there's some truth in there. Maybe if we squint, it'll come to light. Plus, back then, people really thought natural disasters were like a punishment from the gods above. Okay, so, look, you guys, this chair isn't comfortable. And if you've been following me for a while, you know my chair struggles. I am not satisfied with any chair ever available on the market. I just had to tell you that because you're going to see me moving around a lot if you're watching this on YouTube. My butt hurts, okay? But let me get back to the story. Okay, so look, if you're a sinner, God punishes the people and gets rid of your land. Like, that's what, you know, Great. So there's a good chance that there's some fact to the story of Atlantis, or at least like some version of it, right? I mean, there are people so sure that Atlantis is out there that they've dedicated their whole lives to finding it. Explorers have looked in the oceans of Scandinavia, Spain, Greece, the Canary Islands, wherever the hell that is, just searching for these lost islands. Here's the kicker. It may have already been found. Atlantis? It might have been. You see, with all of the mystery and cool stories surrounding Atlantis, people are obviously gonna build it up in their heads. It's kind of like when your friend Deb or Joan is like, hey girl, like I've met this amazing guy. He's so hot. Oh my God, he's so hot. And he's got like a 6-pack and like, you know, he's just incredible. And he like does things for me, like takes me out for dinner at In-N-Out or something. And then you finally meet this guy and you're like, that guy? That one? Like, Joan, are you all right, girl? You need some glasses? Are we looking at the same person? You know? It's because we have on the love goggles, right? And yeah. Anyways, it's possible that this has happened with Atlantis. I mean, over time, it's been so overhyped to the point that people are out there looking for like this whole utopia, this whatever they've created in their minds. But the thing is, like, there have been lots of sunken cities found that could have been Atlantis. I mean, they were in the right area of the world. They were from the right time period, but maybe people were just underwhelmed or like let down and they're like, there's no way that's Atlantis. Atlantis wouldn't look like that, you know? So if it happened to so many other cities, why couldn't Atlantis be one of them? Before you say I've completely lost it, let's talk about the cities we have cold, hard proof about. Hey everybody, look at my socks. Aren't they cute? You know who sent them to me? Best Fiends. Not sponsored, but you know I have worked with Best Fiends before. They're like, bitch, you love this app so much, we're gonna send you some socks. I live in them, Best Fiends. I live in them. So, we're back. These cities that have been found underwater, you ask? Well, I'm here to tell you that they're actually so cool. I spent hours on Google just looking at the pictures because they're so cool and it's so freaky. There's literally whole cities underwater. The fish must love it. Because you know, like when you get a new goldfish and then you put little castles and stuff in the bowl and you watch them and you're like, oh my God, I know you're living just going in and out of that little castle. Like they love it, right? I bet the fishes love it. Oh yeah, okay, back to the story. They're just whole cities underwater. Like 1 second, everything's fine, la-di-fucking-da, you know, and then the next thing, giant tsunami, gone, donezo. Now, one of the reasons experts believe that Atlantis could be real is because there's a long history of whole villages, islands, and cities getting completely wiped out. This was kind of a common occurrence for ancient Greek civilizations. I mean, earthquakes, tsunamis, and even volcanic eruptions completely destroyed entire civilizations. I mean, there's Pompeii, hello, we know Pompeii, and Crete. I didn't know about Crete. I just learned about it right now, this very second. Oh my God, wait, let me tell you, because there's actually another city, ancient Alexandria. Yep, she is a full-ass sunken city in Egypt. Underwater. Buildings, statues, everything. Look up the pictures. Wow. Divers and researchers have documented it, and the pictures are so cool. This city is perfectly preserved underwater, but again, nobody really knows how it got there in the first place. So if this whole city is underwater, why can't Atlantis be, right? Also kind of related, but there was this huge library in Alexandria, Egypt, that burned down and thousands of years of ancient knowledge burned up with it. Many claim that the answer for Atlantis could have been in there. I highly recommend a good Google of it, or maybe I can do like an episode about it because it's wild. Yeah, it's really interesting. Of course, there are theories. There's always theories, of course. There's one theory that a volcanic eruption in 1500 BC destroyed a bunch of Greek islands, and Atlantis could have been one of them. Another theory that people believe is that in 2010, people think that they found Atlantis's ruins near the coast of Spain. So this got people thinking, well, maybe we're just looking in the wrong place, or maybe we already found it, or maybe we're just being impatient because on top of that, we're still discovering new things, new islands today. Like in 2021, a new island was just discovered off the coast of Greenland. And now all the maps have to be updated. Maybe we just need to like wait it out or something. I don't know. Okay, look, we can't talk about mysterious oceanic disappearances, or as I'm calling them, damp Disappearances without talking about the Bermuda Triangle. Now, you've probably heard about this one before, right? Everybody has heard of the Bermuda Triangle. And if you haven't, then I don't know what you've been doing. What have you been doing? I feel like it was all anyone talked about in middle school. And then we all just kind of forgot about it and decided to go to Turks and Caicos was worth the risk. Well, I haven't forgotten. You'll never find me in Turks or Caicos. Either way, the Bermuda Triangle is still snatching ships and taking names. It's not a thing of the past, Barbara. To this day, it's still taking lives. So what I'm asking you to do is pack your water wings because we're going to deep dive into the Bermuda Triangle. Great. So our story begins December 5th, 1945. As part of a U.S. Navy training exercise, 14 men in 5 different planes take off from a naval air station in Florida for a routine training mission. Now, this training mission was called Flight Number 19. That's what this mission is called. So it was a very routine thing that they were doing, and it was nothing new, right? Okay, great. The planes that they were flying were called torpedo bombers because they could go so fast, I guess up to 300 miles per hour fast. These planes did not look around. They were considered the workhorses of World War II because they were so reliable and the military could always count on the bombers and their pilots to get the job done. It was said that on the day of the training mission, the weather was like super sunny and unseasonably warm. What we do know is that around 3:00 p.m., everything was going according to plan. People were out fishing on their ships and they see the planes like in the sky heading safely east around that time. But then everything changes. Around 3:40 p.m., a distress call comes in from one of the lead pilots on this mission. Now, this was strange because this pilot had thousands of flight hours under his belt and had flown through World War II. I mean, this guy knew what he was doing. Anyways, so this lieutenant calls in saying both of his compasses are out and that he was lost. He's freaking out because without his compasses, he had no idea how to get back to Fort Lauderdale, and he had no idea where he was in the first place. So he's asking for help from the naval base. They're going back and forth, just in emergency mode. And then all of a sudden, silence. Ooh. One plane after another goes dark, and then all 5 planes in the training exercise just poof, vanished. Everybody back on the base was listening for updates, and they're just scratching their heads like, what the hell is going on? What's happening? Nobody could explain how 14 very experienced airmen in 5 legit planes, like some of the best airplanes ever, could just vanish into thin air. No trace. Where'd they go? Nobody knows. Despite this being one of the biggest air and sea searches in history, that would be the last time anyone had ever heard from them ever again. That sucks. Could you imagine? Where'd they go? That's so weird. Anyways, this wasn't the first time some weirdness was documented in this particular area of the Atlantic Ocean. You see, all the way back in 1492, everyone's favorite rapist and murderer, Christopher Columbus, he was out sailing, crossing the ocean blue, unknowingly towards the Bermuda Triangle. Oh yeah, get him, Bermuda, get him! At night, I guess he's out there and he sees like some bright, mysterious lights moving around in the distance out in the ocean. He calls his crew to take a look, but every time they would, the lights seemed to vanish and disappear, and they really thought nothing of it. Like maybe it was just a ship in the distance. Mary Celeste, is that you? You know? But then Christopher Columbus said that a glowing object came out of the water and started shooting towards the sky. This obviously freaked everybody out. I think all of us would be scared. Or maybe they're just on drugs. I mean, to be fair, we could all take this with a grain of salt. I think we all know that Christopher Columbus isn't that credible. He was known to get a little creative with his stories, add a little flavor to them. But my point is the Bermuda Triangle has been suspicious for quite some time. And Christopher Columbus's little journal entry marks the first time somebody had written down that there was something fishy going on beneath the waters in this little area. It wasn't just some like normal part of the ocean. And then we go to March of 1918, okay? The USS Cyclops is a ship that was used by the United States Navy and it's like this big old ship and made it all the way through World War I. They named it Cyclops because it was a freaking beast. And this isn't a ship that just goes missing. It's huge. It's got sharp corners. It looks like the Tin Man. It's indestructible. You couldn't even put a dent in this bad boy. This ship honestly looks aggressive. If you see a picture of it, it's like, woo, I'll fuck you up, man. Like, that's how this ship looks. So in order to operate this beast, the ship had a huge crew made up of 306 people. It was used for all sorts of things, but on this particular voyage, the Cyclops was carrying 11,000 tons of it was like carrying manganese. It was carrying manganese. 11,000 tons of this chemical element that was used to make steel at the time. So it's like this silvery metal. It's on the ship. And then there's a lot of it. So on March 4th, 1918, the Cyclops sent out a message back to their home base saying, "Weather fair, all is well." Now, this would be the last time anyone would ever hear from the USS Cyclops. The hundreds of people on board vanished along with the ship without so much as an SOS signal. Now, this baffled the Navy. What happened? They ended up searching for months. And on June 1st, 1918, the Cyclops was declared lost and the crew officially deceased. Not a single shred of evidence from the wreck could be found. I mean, there's not a shred of the chemical, nothing from the ship, nothing. Just once again. In an article about the disappearance, it was said, quote, "She just disappeared as though some gigantic sea monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths of the ocean," end quote. It's still the deadliest unsolved mystery in the history of the Navy. Bermuda strikes again. After decades of mysterious disappearances, a magazine finally gives this creepy area the official name, which is the Deadly Bermuda Triangle. Now, there are no official boundaries of this triangle, but if you look at a map, you'll see it goes from the tip of Florida to Puerto Rico to Bermuda and then back to Florida. It's a huge area of the North Atlantic Ocean, about 500,000 square miles, or like 2 times the size of Texas. A big old triangle. To make things even spicier, the Bermuda Triangle is smack in the middle of something called Hurricane Alley, which, as you may have been able to guess, is a very stormy area. It's said that the waters can get very choppy, huge waves will come out of nowhere, and it's just overall extremely dangerous. You're not going fishing in the Bermuda Triangle is what we're getting at. One of the first theories is fun and has to do with something we already covered. Some people think that the Bermuda Triangle is actually the location of the lost city of Atlantis, which, if you think about it, kind of actually makes sense. Has anyone looked into this? They think that the people of Atlantis maybe had some powerful crystals that were filled with tons of energy, like batteries, along those lines. Anyways, they think these crystals may have had the power to pull any ships or planes that cross over them all the way to the very bottom of the ocean. There's another theory, if you don't like that one. As always, America comes through with the aliens. Not even America. People come through with the alien theory. I mean, again, when in doubt, you gotta point the finger at somebody. Aliens, you can't prove that it isn't aliens. And when there's no women to blame, you gotta look to the little green man. And some people believe that aliens are using the Bermuda Triangle as a portal into our world, kind of like a black hole in the ocean. They believe the lights Christopher Columbus saw in 1492 was a clear sign that this portal was real. Yeah, for sure. So it's believed that these aliens are capturing humans and ships and planes into the Bermuda Triangle, take them to the alien portal, and then bring them up to their alien spaceship for research. Yeah, that sounds legit. I mean, it explains how a bunch of ships, planes, and people go missing without a trace. Aliens. Sure, I don't like that theory. I think that one's a little boring. The next theory, and probably the most scientific, compasses. Compasses. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk compasses. Compasses were the only thing people had to navigate the ocean at the time. Now get this. Compasses, if you don't know, work based on the magnetic pole of the Earth. And whatever freaky power is beneath the surface of the Bermuda Triangle is messing with it. It's throwing people way off their course. Some people think the high iron content that's left over from a volcano in the area is what throws this magnetic field off. No matter what the real issue is, people to this day can't rely on their compasses or other tools for navigation in Bermuda. All of the machines start malfunctioning. Where am I? My compass is no longer working. To further expand on that, there's actually videos you can see on YouTube where people go to the Bermuda Triangle with an old school compass, and you'll see the compass spinning around and around and around. Like there's something going on, like a magnet. And not only that, the waters in the area were known to have rogue waves, which are essentially massive waves that come out of nowhere and could reach up to 100 feet high and just wipe ships out. So the theory is that these waves were powerful enough to destroy all evidence of a ship or airplane. But there's nothing to prove that this was the case for the USS Cyclops or the guys on Mission Flight 19. Plus, if it was a powerful wave, there would be debris. It would end up somewhere. Anyways, look, all of these are theories and nothing is proven. Nobody knows exactly what is going on there. But what we do know is that the Bermuda Triangle continues to drag victims to their watery grave to this very day. Oh yeah, more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes have mysteriously disappeared, leading to hundreds of people just vanishing. Except for Christopher Columbus, though. He made it through for some reason. Come on, Burmy. We were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. You could have gobbled him right up. To this day, an average of 4 planes and 20 ships are said to vanish in the zone every year, leaving no trace behind. Not a boot, not a body, not a piece of wood, not even a button, nothing. Poof. God. The theory, my theory, the Bermuda Triangle has some kind of weird magnetic pool going on underneath of it, right? And it's sucking down all these ships and stuff because it makes sense. Just go with me, visualize, you're with me, great. So that USS Cyclops was carrying a bunch of that chemical compound, which maybe the magnet was super attracted to, and they had so much of it that it sucked the thing right down. There was so much of it on the ship, pretty powerful magnet. That's my theory. It's just a magnet. There's something going on down there. It sucked everything up. And if we could just get down there, I'm sure we could find what's going on, but for some reason, nobody wants to go scuba over there. I'll do it. Never hear from me again. At least I'll have the answers. Anyhow, so the ocean is badass and it demands to be respected, just like corn. Okay, so this part always bothers me because it's why are our nipples so hard for going to outer space? And going to Mars and going to other planets and stuff when there are literally terrifying mysteries and things that we haven't even seen as humans right here on Earth, maybe just lurking in the bottomless abyss of our ocean, waiting to be discovered. But instead you guys want to go to Mars. Boo. Well, everyone, thank you so much for hanging out and learning with me today. Remember, don't be afraid to ask questions to get the whole story because you do deserve that, don't you? Stay curious. It's good for your noggin. I'd love to hear your reactions to this story, so make sure to use the hashtag Dark History over on social media so I can follow along. Join me over on my YouTube where you can watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs. And while you're there, don't forget to check out Murder, Mystery, and Makeup. Yippee-ki-yay! I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. You make good choices, please. Don't go fishing out in the Bermuda, and I'll be talking to you next week. Goodbye.